Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Josh.
And this is the Bad at Magic podcast, the podcast about games, life, and other things. And welcome to episode 99.
So, Ben, I'm on this kick where I'm not being coy about how I'm tying in the episode number to what I'm talking about. And so I'm going to stick with that for today because 1999 was so good for movies. Like, I was researching interesting things about 1999. The only thing I came across that was outstanding was oh, look at this list of movies. I'm like, oh, that's dumb. Wait a minute. No, there's some gold here.
All right, well, let's hear about some of the gold in the year 1999.
Okay, so just right off the bat, Iron Giant. I mean, fantastic. You haven't seen it, go see it.
Classic animated picture.
Fight Club. The Green Mile.
Wow.
They're so good. The Matrix. American Pie. Which, good or bad, it depends on your perspective, but definitely changed American culture for a while. Same thing where Eyes Wide Shut. Very talked about film. Galaxy Quest. We just talked about that on the podcast.
Yeah.
10 Things I Hate About You, which is a classic teen will they, won't they kind of thing. Office Space, which I can quote to this day. The Sixth Sense. That was
all this came out in the same year?
In 1999. Never Been Kissed. The Blair Witch Project, which started the entire fad about found footage movies, which I hate those, but thanks Blair Witch Project. Dogma, which I keep saying is an amazing movie about organized religion that you should go watch. Varsity Blues, which made me feel sad about my high school career not being as exciting as it was supposed to be. Boondock Saints, just a pinnacle piece of culture. And then, Ben, where would we be without Star Wars The Phantom Menace?
Yes. Oh, man. I waited in line for a midnight showing surrounded by guys in Jedi robes and fake lightsabers.
And then you all left the theater looking at each other, trying to figure out, that was Star Wars and we loved that, but it wasn't really great, right?
Can I give a counterpoint on that? Because I feel like that's a little bit of presentism. At the time, it had been so long since Star Wars Return of the Jedi that it just was exciting. The disillusionment hadn't set in yet.
Okay.
All of the product tie-ins and the commercials on TV and the breakfast cereals and the action figure toys and the video games and the hype and stuff. And I didn't feel let down. I enjoyed it.
You know what? I will say that too. When you first saw it, you walked out of the theater and the last thing you can remember was Obi-Wan Kenobi using the Force to somehow get past Darth Maul on the high ground to backflip over him and then cut him in half. So and then the movie basically wrapped up in the next 3 minutes. So I guess I can see your point.
Yeah. Anyway, wow, 1999 was a good year for movies.
Not just a good year for movies, but a good year for movies that really changed cinema.
You're right. I'm thinking of those The Mummy, The Matrix, Blair Witch Project, Office Space. All those were very quotable or influential in the visual repartee of movies. I mean, they all just really influenced things.
Did you notice how Brendan Fraser did a ton of movies in the late 90s and then just disappeared off the face of the earth for a long time?
Yeah.
Do you know why that happened?
I think so. But
I saw an interview with him, and apparently he insisted on doing all his own stunts in those high-budget action movies, and he just messed himself up so badly, and he just decided to buy a big ranch in the Northeast somewhere and just recover and live off of his proceeds and his back-end points and just stop because he was just in such bad shape.
So it was his decision, because I'd heard rumors he'd been blacklisted by Hollywood or something like that, but that wasn't the case?
That wasn't it was an interview with him, so if he was blacklisted, that wasn't going to be the message that he said. Yeah.
I wanted it to be this way.
It's I fractured my back and I couldn't really move, so I just decided to take it easy. Okay. The blacklist thing, that does fill in the other half of that.
And then he comes back and makes a niche indie film and starts, winning Golden Globes and stuff.
So he's got acting chops, I think. He's not a bad actor or anything. So when he did say I broke myself, I could see that because the guy can act.
Yeah. And Tom Cruise is, I don't know what I saw. So they're getting ready to come out with another Mission Impossible movie. This guy's immortal. Scientology or something. And I saw a montage of in the same day him doing the stunt where he drives the motorcycle off the cliff 6 times in the same day to make sure they got the right cut, the right shot of filming this. It's insane.
What does that do to your insurance? Like, if you're the movie producer and you're like, oh, we're going to have these great stunts. Like, okay, here's the standard stunt insurance package. Oh, and Tom Cruise is going to do his own stunts. And then the insurance agent just slides that packet back. Like, hang on a second. Tom Cruise is doing the stunts? Here's a much thicker sheet of documents.
Link in the show notes. There's some great clips in this scene where the director's watching him drive the motorcycle off the cliff for the first time. And they're all just standing there going, with their hands on their heads going, what have we done?
I don't think we got it. Let's go again. No, Tom, you got it.
All right, Josh, in episode 98, you and I had this weird discussion about you losing your Roku remote. And we kind of ended up down a rabbit trail about whether or not RF radio frequency transmitter remotes are allowed by the Federal Communications Commission.
Oh, yes, Ben. And that gave me a really good excuse to blow off work for 45 minutes and look at FCC governing documents. And I'm not being sarcastic at all when I have this tone in my voice.
45 minutes?
Yeah.
You always accuse me of spending too much time doing research.
Again, this goes back to that whole compliance thing, man. I got a kick out of going down and looking cross-referencing FCC regulations. Yeah. So anyway, like I said, I proposed in the podcast last episode that as long as the transmitter's under a certain frequency or under a certain power level, like the FCC doesn't care. And that's actually true. Remote controls are classified as intentional radiators as for the FCC, and they're governed by Title 47 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 1, Subchapter A, Part 15, Subparts C, F, and H. And then
Section 15.209.
Don't steal my thunder. Yes, Section 15.209. It includes a chart with power limits depending on the frequency band that the remote is using. That as long as you're under these power limits at this distance, then you don't have to have more special clearance from the FCC. Instead, you just have to have a broad statement that says this device complies with the FCC Title 47, 15209.
Right. You're using the reserved portion of the electromagnetic spectrum that's allowed for personal use.
Right. And you are abiding by the power limits that's governed by those spectrums. And so you just have to say on your device, like, hey, it's all cool because we're using this like allowed safe harbor in the FCC rules to use this remote stuff.
Okay, quick aside story. So there was this contest that they did back when I was a middle school teacher where they were going to compete the classes against each other, and they gave you these little robots and you were supposed to decorate them or build them or whatever. They were little cars or something, and run them down the hall and see who's won the race. So I actually boosted mine so that I put an external battery pack that amped up the
you
voltage.
overvolted it, yeah.
I overvolted it, and our car won the race because, we put more power on it. So I'm wondering, like, you could take your Roku remote, and if you just added a few extra batteries, you would all of a sudden be, like, in violation of Section 15.209 in the FCC regulations.
So you're assuming that whatever battery is in there gets directly translated into the broadcaster, and there has not been, like, an electrical circuit that's done that for years, man. And if it does, it's poorly designed because all that stuff's got to go through signal processing and power cleaning and all that stuff.
Okay. But if you did, what is the actual, what is the wattage limitation?
We are not the first people to think about this. I'm sure if we go to YouTube right now, there is some electrical engineer that has torn apart his remote. It's like, let's make my RF remote turn on my neighbor's TV from 3 blocks over.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm sure we've regaled our audience with enough tales of FCC regulations.
Listen, listeners, if you want to know more about FCC regulations or random government agency rules, man, hit me up in the Reddit or the Facebook, because I don't know why, but my brain just likes going through rules.
I'm coming to you amidst boxes and stuff. Like, I'm leaving in less than a week, and 2 days ago, my grandmother died.
Oh, Ben.
My paternal grandmother, who was 97 years old.
I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you. She was born in 1925. And, man, that's a long time ago. And I'd seen her a year and a half ago. She was still doing okay, but suffering. And we're sad to see her go, but I'm glad she's not suffering anymore. And they're starting to plan the funeral, and it looks like the funeral's going to be the day after I'm supposed to fly to the Middle East.
Oh, so you're going to be fighting the fight while the funeral's happening.
Right. I'm not going to be able to go.
Well, get a life-size cardboard cutout of you made, and then have your family take it with you, and then you can be in all the pictures.
Yeah, you say that jokingly, but my family has more than one photo of family photos with cardboard cutouts.
Life-size cardboard cutouts.
Yeah. We have leaves of absences. Usually it's missionary service, but deployments also kind of count for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think this falls into that category. At least it had better.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that later on. So for our main segment today, we're going to talk about Generation Kill by Evan Wright, and we'll talk about what their service is like. I was thinking about I love my grandmother, and I'm going to miss her. And I was thinking about the way that she'd had her wishes about not having a formal funeral, so they're not even going to go to a church or have like a meeting. They're just going to go say a few words as they lower her casket into the ground. And I wanted to be there for my family, for the togetherness that these kinds of things bring, but I'm not going to be able to make it. So I'm a little bit chagrined about that. I'm not grieving openly in that, like, she was 97. I kind of felt like the last time we saw her was the last time I was going to see her. That's all I have to say about that.
You have any plans to... I'm sure you can make your own plans, though, right? Like, you're going to be traveling, but I'm sure there's going to be, like, at whatever airport you lay over at, there'll be, like, a little chapel, or if you just want to do the wailing and gnashing of teeth, like, in the aisle of the airplane while you're flying over the Atlantic or something. People would get it.
Yeah. Yeah. So things like this do this weird thing where we put that in the back of our mind and we say, that's not going to bother me, but it's bothering you. And then something else happens in your life, like you're packing up all of your belongings and you're arguing with your wife about who's lifting higher on one end of the dresser or something like that.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, you're having it's that below threshold stress that then something else catalyzes and pushes you over the stress, the threshold. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's hard to say, like, I just yelled at you about that dresser because my grandmother died. Like, because I didn't think I was thinking about that, but
yeah. Funny thing about stress and emotions is they're cumulative. They're not parallel. Like, you can't feel two things at the same time. One just stacks on top of the other one, and they blend together.
That's a good way to put it. And I think Evan Wright was looking at that with the Marines that were going through combat stress. So we'll talk about that later on. Josh, we need to do a Bad at Technology segment because you, for some reason I cannot understand, are on this never-ending quest to, like, optimize your office computing experience.
Ben, of all people, you should know perfection is a moving target.
So a while back, you had made a big push, well documented on this podcast, towards widescreen monitors.
Yes.
And you were upgrading your video cards and your processing and getting ultra widescreen monitors. And you convinced me, and I bought one off Wish.com that was a refurbished Samsung 34-inch ultra wide HD display. The problem was that the reason this was on Wish.com is it had one of these really quirky, terrible tech issues that was the reason it was refurbished.
Yeah, you said it would just flicker on and off every minute or two.
Yeah, and sometimes it wouldn't come back on without turning it on and off, and the power button wouldn't work, so you would literally have to unplug it and replug it.
Yeah, that's
in order to. It was to the point where it was untenable.
Well, I kind of want to victim blame you for getting it on Wish, but at the same time, I've gotten stuff on refurbished on Woot all the time, and Amazon. The monitor I just bought.
Maybe it was Woot. Amazon. I said Wish, but I meant Woot.
Okay. Well, sorry. I usually do recommend Woot because I've not had a bad experience with them.
Yeah. And I can see why with this particular piece of technology, it made it past the screening. Like, they sent it back to the company, they plugged it in, watched it for an hour, no issues, and packaged it back up and sold it again. Yeah,
like you said, hard to diagnose, hard to repeat. Like, and it depends on the setup, too. Maybe they had... Who knows? Maybe it's the wiring in your house that has
or maybe it was
power.
the refresh rate that my video card was putting out or something like that.
There's so many variables that could trip that thing up. I'm sorry that you had a bad experience with an ultra-wide monitor. Did you stick with ultra-wide or did you just go back to dual monitors?
So right now I'm on a dual monitor display, but on my good desktop that has a RTX 3090 Ti, I have a
3090 Ti.
I have like a 28-inch square, mostly curved screen, And I like that. It's very comfortable to view, but I don't find it to be particularly useful for productivity type applications, like when I was preparing my seminary lessons.
So this is what I texted you about when we started talking about, we had the new monitor conversation, is because, so a while back I made a new desk for my kids because during the summer they need a space to do their stuff. Well, Ben, it is summer. And so we have... I have 3 PCs that are all built in the same case because I really like this Cooler Master case that everybody likes to dog on the internet. And so my daughter and my son both have their own computers that I built underneath the desk. And I built my daughter's upside down so she can still see the window and the lights blinking and stuff.
What? How do you... I didn't know you could do... Wait, what?
Okay. All right, so the case that I'm using,
I understand what you're saying. So they're under the desk, and usually in a case, it's so if you have the back facing the back, then the glowing window is on the left-hand side, so that if you have the computer to the right of you, you can see all the LEDs and stuff.
Right. And
but
so
are you saying there's a way inside of a case you can put the motherboard in so that if you set it... What?
So my son's setup is on the left, and we push the computers all the way against the back wall, so like they don't stick out very far. So the window is facing forward, so you can always see it.
Okay, got it. So the cables go out.
The cables go to the left, right? But on my daughter's, one, I wanted the cables to go to the right because she's on the right side, and that's where all the grommets and stuff are. And also, I wanted the window to be on the front, so I needed to build it upside down. But like all you have to do, because this case, again, people like to dog on it because it's super cheap, but this is one of the benefits of being super cheap. What defines its bottom, in air quotes, is that they put the feet on that side. Well, the feet are just plastic add-ons that clip into the standard hole layout of all 4 sides of the case. So I just popped the feet out, put the feet on top, flipped the whole thing over, and just built it upside down.
Awesome.
Yeah, so now the same thing. The window is facing front, but all the wires are sticking out to the right.
The motherboard is upside down, so the cables are in a different way than you would expect. But other than that, it's fully functional and no
difference.
None the wiser.
It's actually probably better because now the power supply is on top, and it's not being suffocated by the carpet. Yes, all you computer nerds out there, I can hear you yelling at me through the internet already. I will elevate these computers at some point to get them off of the carpet, I promise.
Okay, so this is
the thing.
That's really cool. I'll have to go back and look at the photo you sent because I didn't notice that one of them was upside down.
Well, and here's the thing. Now we're so far down the rabbit hole, I forgot where we were. We're talking about the monitors, okay?
Right.
So my son inherited my wife's monitor, my wife's ultra wide, which was the hand me down from my first ultra wide because that's a 1080 monitor, which is fine for most purposes, but I found it to be a little restrictive. Like there wasn't enough screen real estate for me to be really productive on it, and so then I bought a 1440p ultra-wide monitor, also refurbished from Woot, and my wife got the hand-me-down 1080p monitor. Well, then my son inherited the 1080p monitor, and my daughter, I set her up with the spare monitor that we had in a closet that's like a 33-inch or 32-inch monitor from, dude, it's got to be the aughts. Like, I've had this thing just lying around just in case you need it.
That sounds awesome. Like,
well, it's got huge bezels. Like, it's got like 4-inch like red bezels all the way around. Like, it's atrocious. Like, by modern standards, it's terrible. She doesn't care, no. But I care. And so my wife said, at one point, my wife, like, this is the thing, I don't care about my daughter's monitor that much. But my wife goes, oh, is Jane going to get a new monitor too? And I'm like, I didn't realize that was on the menu. And so then, of course, I start shopping around for new monitor arms and another ultra wide.
Oh,
but here's the thing. See. So here's the thing, Ben. I have the option.
You got the green light.
Yeah, I got the green light to go to get a new monitor for my daughter. Well, here's the thing. What's really the correct thing to do in this case is to shop around.
Buy yourself a new monitor and give her yours.
That's... basically you boiled it down. Like, if we're gonna spend hundreds of dollars on a monitor, we might as well shell it like $40 or $50 more and get me an upgrade, and then Jane can have this perfectly functional monitor that I've been using. And so that's what we did. And that's when I texted you about the Curve, because I was seeing now the curved monitor prices are coming down. I'm like, I could probably wing this. And I'm still an ultra-wide diehard. I love the ultra-wide. I'm on 2 monitors out here while I'm recording, and I hate it because there's this line in the middle I can't use. I just don't like it. But I noticed that, like, I do spreadsheets all day, Ben. I can't emphasize this enough. I do spreadsheets all day. And if I have one spreadsheet pushed to the left side of my ultra-wide and a spreadsheet on the right side of my ultra-wide, which is very, very common, and I'm reading numbers from one side and entering them into the other, if they're at the far edges, if they're at the far edges, like the ultra-wide is wide enough that it's significantly farther away from me than the center of my monitor is. And it does get a little eye strainy to have to, like, I find myself in the afternoons, like, leaning over to get closer to one side.
First world problem.
And then leaning to the other side. Yeah, talk about a first world problem. It's like, oh, I have to lean slightly or strain my eyes ever so slightly to read the numbers off of my 1440p ultra-wide monitor.
Weird Al Yankovic has a song called First World Problems, and one of the lyrics is, my house is so big I can't get Wi-Fi in the kitchen.
Weird Al, mesh Wi-Fi. We fixed that problem years ago. Anyway, Ben, so this is when I started contacting you about, hey, how do you feel about curved monitors for productivity? Because I saw on Amazon, on their refurbished site, yes, Amazon has an entire Amazon refurbished that has a 90-day return policy. So, I mean, good on them. It was in my price range. It was 1 inch bigger than the current ultrawide that I have. It was 1440. It had the refresh rate. It had the response time. Like, it had everything that I wanted it to do. And it was cheaper because it was refurbished. And so I asked you, Ben, what is a curved monitor like for productivity? And you sent me, like, scathing, like, oh, it's terrible.
I don't like my curved monitor for productivity, but it's not a widescreen.
So this is the question, the follow-up question I want to ask you about that is, like, what is the curve rating? Like, what's the number for the curve on that monitor?
I don't know the answer to that. Sorry. I wish you told me and I would have studied.
No problem. Is it super aggressively curved? Is that the problem?
It's pretty aggressively curved.
Okay.
It's not good when I try to if I tried to put two pieces of paper over the screen, they would overlap, and that's the problem.
Oh, that's super aggressively curved. You probably got like a 1000R or something. All right, so here's the thing. All of the curved monitors have this number that's associated with it, and it's like 1000R or 1400R, 1800R or something. It's always R at the end of it. And what that is describing is the radius of the circle that the curve would make in millimeters. So I got an 1800R, which means that if you completed the curve that my monitor was making into a complete circle, that circle would have a radius of 1.8 meters. Which is a really big circle. Now, a lot of gaming monitors, though, they go
gentle curve.
That's a very gentle curve I have. The higher the number, the gentler the curve. But a lot of the gaming monitors are very aggressively curved, and because they expect the user to be sitting really close to it. And so, if you can imagine where the center of the circle is supposed to be, that's where they're expecting you to be sitting. Yeah. And so they aggressively curve it because they expect you to be leaning forward in that hardcore gamer stance over your mouse and keyboard, trying to get those headshots or whatever.
I'll have to look that up because it isn't terrible if we sit across the room and watch it like a movie on Netflix or something. Like, it's no big deal.
You watch a movie on Netflix on a curved monitor from across the room? How big did you say this monitor was?
I don't know, 30 inches.
How big is your TV?
51.
Bro, run a secondary HDMI cable over to your freaking TV and watch it on that.
It's on a different floor of the house.
Bro, run an HDMI cable from your computer to your other TV and watch it on that.
You're giving me, like, don't have so many kids answers.
Doesn't your TV, you were just talking about your TV last episode, your TV has firmware for Netflix.
My TV's upstairs, the kids are on it, I'm downstairs, I'm watching stuff on the computer. If I want to, like, sit on the couch and watch a movie, it works. Is it just than any TV I ever had for my first 3 decades of life.
So? You have a higher standard of living now. Like, is it just you? If it's just you, I'll let this slide. But if you are ever sitting on that couch next to your wife watching a movie because your kids are using the good TV, you're doing it wrong.
My wife and I may or may not have watched the entire season of season 3 of The Mandalorian on this computer monitor.
OMG, Ben, your kids are so ridiculously spoiled. I would have Spartan kicked them down the stairs, be like, get off the big TV, it's my turn.
There's so many complicated social and emotional dynamics to what you're saying. Like, we have peace in our existence. I'm willing to make sacrifices for that peace, Josh. Listeners, I know you are too. I know that you have sacrifices you're willing to make. Like, I am not just the pinnacle, ultimate person of consuming things in this house. You
sound like the prime minister of a country that's just been conquered, justifying how the conquering was totally fine and everything's going to be good. Like just the fact that your children have made you think that there is a dynamic where you're not at the top of this pyramid.
They don't even know that this decision has happened.
Okay. Like
I guarantee it.
They know.
No, they don't.
Well, then kick them off the TV.
If you gone up there and said, "Did you guys tell Dad he couldn't use the TV?" They'd be like, "What are you talking about?"
No, we created an elaborate social trap for him to feel like he can't use the TV, which is so much better. Dude,
wow, that's such a different family dynamic.
If you,
okay, here's another thing you need to understand about my house in Louisiana. This is architectural in origin. We are in a southern style Louisiana house where like the garage is hidden around the back of the house, and there's a bedroom on the main floor, and then bedrooms on the upper floors. Okay. So like the lower floor is my domain. The upper floors are the kids' domain. Like, there's always mess up there that they've made that I don't even got to look at.
Okay. Then why is the 51-inch TV in the kids' domain? You've lost that battle, too. My man, like...
You're saying it's a battle. That's only if there was a fight. Like, this wasn't a compromise. I'm happy with it the way that it is.
You're the one that's justifying having this tiny TV. Like, no, it's fine.
It's not a justification. No,
you should build your domain to suit you, sir. And then your peasants, your proletariat should live in whatever like handouts you deem to give them. Like, this is ridiculous.
I built this the way that I wanted.
Oh, man, you are making some ridiculous sacrifices for reasons that you have yet... You talked about the architecture of your house as a reason for watching a great show on a suboptimal monitor because... for no reason.
Our definitions of suboptimal are different. Well, speaking of suboptimal experiences, Josh, last night at Friday Night Magic, you had an experience that I think I've been through before and you were telling me about, so I want to hear the whole story.
Oh, man, this could be another long bad at technology. Okay, so this all starts with my kids now being out of school, and then they're like, hey, you said when we got out of school we could play World of Warcraft. And I was like, yes, I did. And so I downloaded the free version because that's how it works now. You get the software for free. They put it on their computers. I'm like, there, you have the free version. Your job, both of you together, have to get to the maximum level allowed by the free trial account because you, son, who have played before, have to take this girl child who has never played before and show her the ropes. I am not paying for anything until she knows what she's doing. And then it was great. It was actually really awesome to hear my son complaining about all the things my daughter was doing that my son used to do to me and my wife when we were playing with him back in the day. So that just felt like righteous justice. Like, it came full circle.
Was he teasing her in game, or it was just she was frustrated with the trappings of the game?
No, they're supposed to go together and do stuff. Like, they're going through the starting area. They get quests. They perform the actions that the quest requires, so they turn the quest in. They would come back to turn the quest in, and Carter goes, okay, turn in the quest. And she goes, what are you talking about? Like, you click the guy with the question mark. Like, but the question mark is gray. What do you mean the question mark is gray? You didn't do the quest? Like, what quest? And then it's like, we just spent all this time doing this thing and you weren't doing the thing. And like, just seeing that frustration made me feel like, yeah, that sucks,
what were you
doesn't
doing?
It? That's terrible. Like, I have no pity for you whatsoever because you have any idea how many times you did that to me? Anyway, so regardless of all this, when I set up their accounts, like when I finally said and pulled the trigger, okay, you did the thing, we'll go ahead and we'll pay for your account so you can start doing all the things that you want to do. I went into the system and I was like, all right, create a new account. Like, Carter Fleshman, like, here's his info. And then it's like, oh, a critical error has occurred. You have to sign up on the website. That's weird. Go to the website. Start filling everything out again. It's like, oh, children under the age of 13 are not allowed to have accounts on our system.
Yes. Okay. This is a huge problem in our society. There used to just be you could create an account and it didn't ask to know anything about your identity. And then because of abuses by people, usually probably predators using platforms like this to get access to children, the laws come down that require the game companies that produce these games to verify people's birth dates and associate it with an identity.
Yeah.
They start filtering out. Yeah.
So I got to this wall and I was expecting, okay, well, where's the box that I check where, like, I'm the parent, I will verify my identity and I will acknowledge, yes, very verily, I accept all the consequences of my child being on your platform, yada, yada, whatever. No, that did not exist. I got a hard wall of, you cannot register a login for this account.
Oh, do your kids have Minecraft accounts?
No.
Okay,
no.
So when Minecraft got bought by Microsoft, they pushed down all of Microsoft's procedures for verifying children's accounts because, of course, kids want to play Minecraft from very, very young ages.
Yeah.
And for them to just be like, sorry, you can't play Minecraft until you're 13 is completely untenable. So the way that they do this is this really complicated thing where I, as a parent, have to have an Xbox Live account that's associated with my children's game accounts, and I go in and authorize them to do things very granularly to include, like, do I enable chat? Can they only chat with friends? All those kinds of things. And it's really complicated, and I've had to do it with each one of my kids, and it's so hard.
I glossed over this whole thing, but like to get started, I created each of them their own Gmail account so they can have a login account. And then
did you have to lie about their birth date there?
No, it did the same thing where it goes like, oh, well, this person's under 13.
You can't get an email account if you're under 13.
Yeah, but Google does a thing. It's like, oh, we have to associate with a parent's account first. We'll automatically upgrade the parent's account to a family account and associate these children with your family account. Like that was fairly painless because I had all of those logins already set up. It just took a couple of extra screens to click through. I'm like, okay, yeah, Gmail's up and running, no problem. But so I was expecting the same thing for the World of Warcraft accounts. No, hard locked me out. I had to reset all the cookies and then start over and be like, oh yeah, this kid is totally 39. Like I just put in my birthday. Like just screw your whole system. I am lying to you deliberately because I just want my kids to play this game. I will monitor their safety.
Do you feel like that situation has been... So the game company has to comply with the laws. And they want their children using their platforms to be safe from abuses and predators and stuff. But then we create this situation where, like, how do we satisfy the law but also allow people access? Do we just make them lie about their birthdays?
I guarantee you this was a deliberate decision at the board, in a boardroom somewhere. They said, okay, here are the two options that we have. We can either, one, set up an elaborate and expensive identity verification and parental controls system, or two, we hard lock them out, force them to lie about their birthday, which then puts them in violation of the end user license agreement and absolves us of all responsibility.
Yeah. So then the company, even though they know that people are lying about their birth dates, has complied with the letter of the law.
Yes. And have removed all liability from them because technically they're forcing us to lie to them in order to get this to work.
Yeah. That's an interesting legal dead end we end up at in our lives. Okay, so you've done this already to get email accounts so you could create the game accounts, and now you're trying to get through the mountain of parental protections.
Oh, there was no wall there. After I lied about their ages and told them they were my age, everything, I was allowed to spend as much money as I wanted on their platform. Like they had no qualms about it whatsoever.
But if your kids were and you had to pay for accounts for each of them, so once they jumped through your hoops, were you worried about them being exposed to people finding out they were children and potentially exploiting them?
We have talked to our kids about this for years now. Literally years. We have told them about online safety. You don't tell people your real name. You don't tell people your real address, your phone number, how old you are, if you're a boy or girl. You don't tell people personal information ever. And like my son played World of Warcraft sitting next to me for like a whole year through the COVID quarantine. And there was times where it came up where he started chatting with people in the game. And I would monitor and make sure that he was, doing the correct things and talking about the things in the game. Like, you don't have to talk about anything that's real. And he knows that. And he tells me when stuff like that happens. So
if I got the 1,000-yard stare just now, it's because I have not given my kids those talks like you just said. And I'm reflecting on if I've done something else that submits for that or if I've simply been negligent in my parenting.
Well, I'm not going to call you a negligent parent. That's like you said
what
that.
I am.
All right, so that's all fine. That all worked its way out. I lied about their ages on World of Warcraft, and now everything's fine because Blizzard doesn't care. However, last night I went to Friday Night Magic, okay? And the way that the game store owner, he always comes around and he has a little label printer, and after we pay to sit down to play Magic for the night, he does like a $5 table fee, and then you just do a bunch of casual stuff the whole night. So it's $5. You get to hang out, whatever. It's fine. Then he comes around with little labels that have the game code on it for the companion app. And he says, please log into the companion app and say that you're on here so I can send these statistics to Wizards of the Coast so they can send me like the promos and like know that, hey, I'm a legitimate game store and I'm doing these things. Because Wizards of the Coast has, I looked into this when I was selling Magic Sigils, they have a very high bar for verifying and maintaining your status as a local game store. to get all of the benefits and your wholesale costs and all that stuff. You have to prove it on a consistent basis. And this is one of the ways that he proves that attendance at these events is by having me log in on my phone separately into his system and say, yes, I participated in his event.
Okay.
Well, every week we go there, he has to manually enter my son into the system because my son doesn't have an account for the companion app. And so last night I just wasn't feeling it after the first game, and I sat out while my son played another game, and I was like, oh, you know what, Felix, I'm going to fix this for you. I'm going to take this time, I'm going to set him up with his separate login account, and then when I come every week after this, I'll be able to log in as myself, log in, and then log out, log in as my son, and log him in.
Were you anticipating that you were going to run into the same wall of protections that were the cause of all your struggles with World of Warcraft?
Not for this one. Like, this game is for, I get that on the
it's
packaging.
For playing in person, but you're still accessing an app. So the law is kind of insensitive to that kind of thing. Now, again, we got child, gaming, protect them.
Well, but the companion app for Wizards of the Coast has nothing.
You're right. There's no chat feature. Yeah. There's no interaction. There should be a loophole that allows them to bypass it, but there probably isn't.
So here's what happened: is I started trying to set up a new account, and the same thing happened. I'm in the app setting up a new account. I put in the birth date, his actual birth date, and it goes, an error occurred. You need to sign up on the website. I'm like, oh, here we go. And so I click that, and I go to the website. It has me start over. So I start over. I'm filling him out a Magic account. He's like, oh, okay. He is under 13 years old. He needs to have a parent sign off and say that he can have this account. I'm like, sure, no problem. They go, we use this third-party service to verify the identity of parents. Please click here to create an account with them so then they can verify you in our system so then we can verify your son in our app.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm like, okay, but I'm reaching my threshold of how much pain in the butt I'm willing to accept for this. So I go to this other website and like, oh, okay, hi, you're from, and it did all the things it's supposed to do. It sent all the session stuff over, so it knew what I was trying to do, okay? And so I start putting in my information because it wants me now. It wants to know who I am and verify who I am so I can verify my son. And so I put in all of my information. And I get through and I create my profile. And it's like, great, here are the next 3 steps. We need to verify your email. Easy. Done in 5 seconds. Go to my email, click the thing, and then it turns green on the page in real time. So like, oh, that's pretty good. Like, okay, great. Now we need to verify your identity as, your age as the parent. I'm like, okay, how are we going to do this? And I click it and it goes, we have 2 options for you. You can download, print, sign, and fax these 3 pages of documents to us and then wait 2 days for us to process it. Or you can pay 99 cents and we can verify it through your credit card. And that's when I immediately like, nope, burn this whole thing to the ground. I went to Felix. I'm like, you're going to be entering that. Like, I'm not giving you my credit card information. I don't care how legit you look. This is not a thing that is happening. You can verify or satisfy all of the identity requirements in other ways. I know you can. I'm not giving you a nickel of money or my credit card information to verify my age. So I went to Felix. I'm like, Felix, you're just going to put his name in there manually from now until
the next 3 years.
Until he turns 13. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Wow, that's interesting. There are things I'm willing to do that over. That exact kind of thing you just described, where like I will put up with a certain level of bureaucracy and inconvenience and stuff, but there are places where I draw the line.
Yeah, that's one of them. Like, what about, like, I don't know, I feel like there's 1,000 ways you can verify somebody's age online that doesn't require either your credit card information or faxing multiple forms.
Faxing? It's interesting that you described that. You said that they'd hired a third party to validate you, and the third party then hired another third party to validate you again, which is the credit card company.
No, basically.
That's what it is.
Well, yeah, and that's why they made it. That's why they said fax and not fill out this online form. Is because, one, either they wanted my pen and ink signature, which is ridiculous in today's day and age, or 2, they wanted to make it a super high bar for pain in the butt, so I would pay the 99 cents for no reason.
Here's one I hate. I hate when I use a retailer with my Apple Pay where it uses my face to validate my biometric identity to my device, which transmits a secure code directly to their server and validates me on both ends by my location and my identity and transmits the financial money to them. And then they print out a piece of paper and ask me to sign it.
Yep. Well, that's just process is not catching up. Like I don't think anybody that has you sign those slips, I don't think you actually need to sign those anymore.
I know. Sometimes out of protest, I'll just draw an X on it. And they'll kind of scowl at it and then take it anyway, because what are they going to do? They already have my money.
Out of protest, I will draw an X. Like, that is... You're so anti-government in the pettiest ways.
What's... Okay, Josh, you just refused to get your son an account based on using your credit card for 99 cents. That's so petty.
What? No, like, that was just like the second of 3 hurdles that I would have to go through on this other third. Like, that was not the last barrier to entry. It was not pay 99 cents and everything's good to go. It was pay 99 cents to continue down this rabbit hole.
But all of these protections exist because dumb people have done dumb things, and I hate when I start running into this. So when I tried to get my children Facebook accounts, I was running into the 13-year thing. So it became a rich family ritual that for their 13th birthday, we would open them up a Facebook account and join them to the family group.
That makes sense.
Anyway, I'd also, for their 13th birthday, I'd get them a bank account where they'd get a debit card, and then I'd start giving them their allowance via electronic transmittal. Well, associated with that, there's a lot of governance that's different than this kind of governance. It's protecting children that... like, for instance, they can't sign up to go to the app to view their balance. So they always have to ask me what their balance is.
That's annoying.
Yeah. So once they get a 16 or something, they can turn it on. I turn it on and enable it for them. I think it's 13 as well. Anyway, the problem I run into is that then some of the controls don't work. They haven't worked out all the bumps because they're trying to comply with all the laws, and that's what the side they're erring on rather than the ease of customer experience and the lack of loopholes and those kinds of things. They're just trying to err on the side of complying. And so, like, for instance, they won't let me turn on paperless. So every month I get in the mail hard copy bank statements for all of my children.
There's a lot of banks that charge for that.
6 times. I know. And I can't turn it off. It just drives me crazy.
That's interesting. Like, so the way you get around the balance, though, obviously, is you give your kids check registers. Like, well, every time you make a transaction, you need to note down who you made the transaction to, what the amount was, and then total up your balance. Like, this is just something that you do.
I try to avoid going back in time. Let's not go back to the 1980s.
Dude, I still have clients that every month they email us. I finally got them to stop mailing them to us via USPS, and they finally started scanning them and emailing us their check registers, like their check stubs. Like, they have those big check books where they write out the check and then tear it out of the perforated paper, and then on the side they've got the little stub where they can write the details of that check. And they send me those stubs every month, and I'm like, what decade are you living in, you crazy person?
Well, okay, do you not have the experience where any of, like, your clubs that the kids are in or the school functions are at where they insist that you pay them by check?
No, all of this. Well, hang on. There's like the ancillary stuff. Like, if we are going to go to like a school basketball game or something, then they want cash. But like their school lunch money, that's all handled through electronic transfer. Like, they have an account in the school system that when it gets so good. Low, it automatically charges our system.
School is in this century. So there's something so quaint and old-timey about, let me get out this document and produce a wet ink signature that I promise to pay you these funds from my account held in ye old bank.
Oh, right. I will say this. There is a tax credit that in Arizona you can pay up to, I think it's $400 for married filing joint to a public school of your choice. And that is dollar for dollar comes off of what your tax bill is for the state. So, nice. Like, if you owe the state taxes, and basically instead of paying the state into the general fund, you can pay directly to your kid's school, which is kind of nice.
Okay.
But that they require you to drive down to the district office, wherever the crap that is, and write them a paper check, and they give you a paper receipt.
Yeah. So as we were packing up all of our belongings, my wife found our last 3 checkbooks, and she says, we only have 3 checks left. And she says, if we get to the new place and they want us to pay the kids' school registration fees via check, and I have to order more checks, so help me, I'm going to the governor.
Okay, so I will say this. Like, when I was getting my CPA, I told you this when I was getting it, but I'm in this limbo where I haven't, I'm no longer an applicant, but I'm not, in their system as a CPA yet because I haven't gone through my first renewal. So I had to send them a paper check to pay for my initial fee, which is, it doesn't matter how much it was. But when I went digging through all of our junk drawers, because that's where the checkbooks live now, I found the only checkbook that we have has my address from Virginia. This is like 3 houses ago, like how old this checkbook is. And it's
my checkbook is from Florida. Man, I haven't lived there since 2004.
I wrote them check number 1007. Like, I don't write checks, man.
Yeah. All right, Josh, it's time for Bad at Rhetoric. I've missed it a couple of weeks. In the discipline of rhetoric, there are 5 canons. The canons are basically, if you're going to conduct the art of rhetoric, you have to go through a process. Invention, arrangement, style, memory, and delivery. Basically, come up with what you're going to say, figure out how you're going to organize it, choose a style you're going to deliver it in, figure out how you're going to commit it to memory and then how you're going to conduct it. So the first one, invention, is finding something to say. What are your topics? And I realized as I was going through this that we do this kind of naturally when we're preparing to do this show. We pick a topic that we want to talk about. We may give it a title or call it a segment or just bring it up in the context of things. And then you might use cause and effect or a comparison or relationships. And at the heart of all of this art of rhetoric, we're conducting first and foremost the idea of invention. Here I'll read a segment of this to you. Invention is tied to the rhetorical appeal of logos, being oriented to what an author would say rather than how it might be said. So basically, at the persuasive core of rhetoric is what is your topic? What do you want to talk about?
Okay. This is starting to click a lot of pieces together in my brain. Like, we had a conversation recently because we approach this podcast in 2 very different ways. And I love how you lay it out there like, oh, we are doing this very structured, rhetorical and logical, consistent procedure whenever we step into the podcast. Like, maybe you are, but bro, I just roll in here and just shoot from the hip because, again, I see this as the opportunity to talk to my friend. And if other people want to listen, like, sign up on the Patreon. Thanks, all you listeners. Yeah. You guys, we love you guys.
But that's what these guys like Aristotle were doing. They were just sitting down and coming up with names for the stuff you do naturally.
So I'm convinced that Aristotle and all of his kin were just a bunch of dudes sitting around shooting the but with bigger words. And people are like, wow, those guys sound really smart. Thinking about existential things or whatever. Anyway, it was funny because I remember we had a discussion, it was a few weeks ago, where I proposed, we didn't have a topic at the time, and I sent you a text message proposing a topic, and we had kind of this, it felt very mildly contentious back and forth because you wanted more structure. And like you were tasking me for like, oh, is there, like, we need to like build more onto it. We need to adapt it. We need to adjust it.
I remember this discussion you're talking
about.
And
I'm over here like, what are you talking about? We're just like, this is a topic. We'll run with it. Like, we're funny, witty, smart dudes. It'll be fine. And you're trying to like actually apply this rhetorical process to it. So that makes a lot more sense.
Aristotle, in fact, defines rhetoric primarily as invention. Quote, discovering the best available means of persuasion.
All right. Moving on and disregarding your point, Aristotle said...
It was a great point. I was reinforcing it. So we're about to talk about a book that we both read, but I've already moved on to my next book. So what I'm reading right now, I don't know why, but as I was traveling around New York City, I hadn't been in a bookstore in a while, and I saw a book that grabbed my attention, just ticked all the right boxes in my weighted average. It was called Another Major Motion Picture Masterpiece by Tom Hanks.
Ooh.
The actor Tom Hanks.
Ooh, well, I mean, all you have to do is put Tom Hanks on the title, and like that's a major motion picture.
So I started reading it. I'm probably about halfway through it, and I'm really digging it. It's basically he's going through the process of producing a movie from start to finish. And when I say from start to finish, I mean like he went back to the childhood of the kid that wrote the comic book that became the intellectual property that the director's using to create the movie.
I don't know how much of that is valuable for the production of the movie, but okay, I get that.
So but we're not going we're looking at the actors, yes, but we're also looking at the director and the associate producers and the caterers. And I know it sounds boring and mechanical, but it's really interesting because he's invested a lot in these characters. I'm enjoying the heck about it. It's really good.
I am actually interested in the, like, not necessarily the story, but the nuts and bolts process, like all of the logistical pieces that go into creating a major motion picture these days.
It's about all of that.
Okay, that might make it on my reading list, which is unusual because I'm not a fan of nonfiction.
Yeah, it's not nonfiction; it's fiction.
Oh, it's fiction, but he's talking about the movie.
Yes,
but it's informed fiction.
They're producing a fictional movie. It's like an MCU movie.
Oh, okay.
But he's not calling it MCU.
But that's what he's going.
They're producing a comic book movie.
Gotcha. Okay. I am currently reading Stormfront by Jim Butcher. This there are people that are screaming in their cars with rejoicing in glee. Because this is the first book of the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. I have never read any of these before. This is my first time through, and I didn't know what they were about. I just knew that they were on all the lists of like, oh, these are books that you have to read if you're a fantasy nut. And like the first paragraph, Ben, like there are books I read that like they drag. Like the first Lost series, like yeah, it was entertaining enough, but I felt like I just wanted to get through them. The first paragraph of this book, I'm all in, baby. Yes, buckle up. Take me wherever you want. Like, throw me in the trunk of your car. I'm down for the ride.
What did it say?
It is based in Chicago. Like, it sounds like the late 90s or the early aughts. And this guy, who's like everything about it feels like a noir, like private detective kind of film, but he talks about how
hard boiled.
He gets his phone rang and he like kind of sighed because he gets a ton of prank calls. Because in the yellow pages, he is listed as Dresden Wizard. And that's his whole thing. Like, he is a wizard for hire. And set in, like, normal, modern-day America in Chicago. And he is, like, the whole shtick of this is, like, yes, magic is real. All of these things you've heard about are kind of real. You just don't get to perceive them. I deal with that crap, and I get a lot of prank calls. And I'm all in. Like, he gets called up by the local police force because he's on retainer to sometimes investigate the way that, like, the psychic gets hired when the cops can't figure something out. He went into a murder scene where there was 2 victims where their hearts literally exploded out of their chests at the same time, and so he was called in as a consultation. I'm over here like, yes, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
Like, this turns out that one of these victims was a high-class call girl that's run by this organization whose head is a vampire. I'm like, yes, please tell me more.
All right, I'm not gonna lie, this sounds kind of interesting. It reminds me of a book I loved as a child by Terry Brooks called Magic Kingdom for Sale.
Ooh.
It starts off with a guy who's a lawyer and his personal life has gone to crap and he's kind of disillusioned and he finds this boutique catalog, and in the back of the boutique catalog there's a listing to pay $1 million and get to go be the lord of a magic kingdom. And it describes the kingdom as this beautiful fairy tale place.
Can we pay in installments?
It's like sight unseen, no questions asked. If you pay us the money, you'll get everything promised in the ad.
Ooh, people would pay that. There are people that would 100% pay that sight unseen.
He just gets all the things are right in his life to like, I'm fed up with my life. I don't have anything tying me here. What's the worst that could happen? I just lose $1 million. Okay. So he pays the money, and it turns out that the kingdom is real, and they take him there, but it's actually in like disrepair, and he now owns it, and he has to try to
He's the lord of a crumbling magical kingdom.
Yes. And it's a whole series. I enjoyed it as a kid, but what you were describing kind of reminded me of it.
Yeah. So I'm a few
Stormfront by Jim Butcher.
Yeah, the Stormfront by Jim Butcher. It's 8 hours long, and there's a ton of these. I have 4 of them already purchased and downloaded on my phone. I'm all in, baby.
Okay. All right. That sounds cool. All right, I want to do a quick board game survivor, Josh, because as we've been packing, you do that thing you do when you're packing up your belongings, and there's so much of it. You're like, why do we have all this stuff? And board games kind of take up a lot of space, and you're like, why do we have all these board games? So my wife and I finally did it. We finally pulled the trigger and shot Old Yeller Monopoly. We had like 4 copies of it. They
4.
all went.
Yeah, get rid of that.
But you know how it is with Monopoly. You get like the Harry Potter edition.
The only copy of Monopoly that is in my house is the Zelda Monopoly, and the only reason I own it is because somebody gave it to me as a gift.
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to play it, but you feel like throwing it away means you hate Zelda.
I came home one night. I think I was recording the podcast, and I went back inside, and my family had taken the cellophane off it because my son wanted to play Monopoly, and they were all sitting at the table playing Monopoly. And, like, my daughter was complaining, like, this isn't even fun. And my son's like, I have all the money, and there's nothing they can do about it. I'm like, yeah, you're playing Monopoly. This is what the game looks like. Everybody's hating life except for one person who's at the top of the pile. That's the lesson that the game is trying to inflict on you.
Okay, so we got rid of Monopoly. I also got rid of Scotland Yard, which I reviewed on this program. It's so close to being a good game, but it isn't quite. Maybe if there's another version of it that fixes some of the problems it has. And then my wife got rid of one that I loved that I didn't know, and I'm like, hey, what happened to this one game? She's like, it's gone. I'm like, oh, I'll have to buy it again. It's called Rush Hour. It's not really a board game in the sense that, like, it's not multiplayer. It's a single-player game. I don't know if you ever played this game. It's a little, like, 20 by 20 grid, and you put a bunch of little tiny plastic cars on it, and there's an exit, and you have to move all the cars around, and they only move frontwards or backwards until you get the...
It's a sliding puzzle game.
Yeah, a sliding puzzle game where you try to get the red car out. And then you just have a deck of cards that you turn over, and it gives you the initial setup, and then the rest is up to you.
We had one of those, like similar to that in a travel version that we used to keep in the car for when we were whenever we were out and about doing something and the kids were bored. And it was the same kind of thing where it was just like a bunch of fixed pieces of certain size and shape, and then your challenge was like, oh, well, you put these pieces in this location, you have these left over, how do you get them into the puzzle kind of thing.
I think one of the problems is we've reached the ubiquitousness of our handheld technology, and there must be 20 apps that are this exact game online.
Oh, like, why do I need? Yeah, absolutely.
Why do I need a board with cards and cars and plastic that I have to set it all up when I can just tap a button and it immediately gives me the next puzzle?
Why should I do any of that when I could be playing Magic on my phone? Like this, like the opportunity cost is so high nowadays for little games like that.
Yeah, so those were 3 casualties. So you asked me if I ever get rid of games in Board Game Survivor. There were 3 that bit the dust this week.
Okay. Now, let's be clear. You didn't get rid of them for the fact of like, oh, I'm a high-minded person and this game does not meet my criteria, so we are getting rid of it. No, you're moving. So that just ended up in the pile of, I'm guessing, 2,000 or 3,000 pounds worth of other stuff that's also not going to make the move.
I'll take slight exception to that. I think there was a quality-based assessment that went in addition to the space constraints.
Are you going to do the thing that people do when they're moving and they're desperate, where you have a garage sale and people come up and they say, how much is this? And you go, $5. And they start walking away. You go, I meant $1. And they walk away still. And you go, I meant free. Please take it away.
Yes. So I've done that 3 times this week. But it's in the 21st century way. Neither my wife or I have any stomach for doing a garage sale and like putting cardboard signs out on the corner and trying to get people to come to our residence. So whenever I have something that I want to get rid of, I go on Facebook Marketplace. I take like 5 pictures. I put it up on there, and every time without fail, it's gone within 24 hours.
That's how we get rid of our last washer and dryer.
I got rid of my pool that way. I got rid of my lawnmower that way. I got rid of a bunch of lumber I had that way. It's all gone, and I got money for it.
My brain stalled for a second because I had to remember that pools on the East Coast are above ground things that you can like move and do stuff with. Because in Arizona,
I think I sent you a picture of it. We just had an above ground pool on the concrete pad out behind our house.
Yeah. Because like if I tried to sell my pool, like that's a part of my yard. That's not going anywhere.
All right, it's time for our main segment, Josh. So you and I both read Generation Kill by Evan Wright. Spoilers for Generation Kill, but I don't know how you spoil something that was just like... You're just going to learn some details of something that's a historical fact. It's a nonfiction book that was written by Evan Wright, who was a reporter for Rolling Stone, who was embedded with 2nd Platoon, Alpha Company, 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, I forget,
2nd Platoon.
Yeah, 2nd Platoon, 1st Marine Division. In the Iraq War that happened back in 2003 to 2008.
So many good things, right? Like just knowing that it's about 1st Recon Marine, there's a lot to talk about just right there. Because first of all, if you look at the hierarchy of the military, like for the U.S., the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, and the Marine Corps, kind of belongs to the Navy. It's a subset of the Navy, but this is basically how we set this up: is that the Army is unstoppable and enormous, but very, very slow. And the Air Force doesn't really do anything by itself. Like, we can project air power, but we can't occupy territory. Like, you can send us and we can blow stuff up into, like, we can glass an entire country, but we're not going to be able to do anything with the country afterward.
Right.
So the Army has to be there, but it takes a long time for the Army to get anywhere. And so the Marine Corps has kind of been filling this niche as quick reaction force for America. Yeah. They're completely self-contained. They have their own air support. They have their own artillery support, all of which are Marines that they can talk to each other. They're all on the same page with everything, supposedly. And because they're like stationed all over the place and pre-positioned on naval ships and whatever, like, they can get anywhere on the planet very, very quickly and project power immediately.
But they can only do it for about 30 days, and then they need help.
Yes, and that's where the Navy and the Air Force is supposed to roll in with the logistical support. And, like, the Army is supposed to show up with infrastructure and actually building crap. The Marines can go literally dig holes and live there for however long you need them to, but at some point you're going to have to feed them.
Okay, so back in 2003, there was a decision that was made, and I think there's some historical precedence for this. I know there is, of in a country, a democracy, where we utilize military might to achieve our political means, we also realize that there's value to be had from being open to the scrutiny of the public. And they won't trust if we're just giving it. If we have a military PR guy sending out press releases saying this is what we want you to know about what we're doing.
That was a direct result of, I want to say, World War II. Like, there was some big campaign that was happening that was going very, very poorly. Maybe it was Vietnam even, where...
I don't know about this. Tell me more.
Well, this was... I can't remember the catalyzing event, but there was an event that happened where the official story was coming out from the military press releases that was night and day different from what was actually happening by people that made their way there and was, like, just basically conducting espionage on our own forces kind of thing. And so that, like, triggered this question, like, not just from, like, well, I guess it was just the American people, but via Congress. Like, Congress is very contentious when it comes to the military, because the military is like, don't worry about it, we'll handle it. And Congress is like, we're the ones paying the bills. You need to tell us what you are doing.
Yeah. There's, in my experience, a congressional inquiry always is one of the most highest priority things that can come down in the military chain of command. Like, when a congressman says he wants to know what you're doing right now, you stop everything you're doing and answer the question.
Or clean up the mess and then invite him to come look at your, everything's fine, nothing's wrong here.
Yeah, so this idea that we are going to take reporters who are not in the military chain of command, don't answer to them, and embed them with our combat units so that they are on the front lines, taking fire, in danger, is revolutionary. Like, a lot of our adversaries don't do that kind of thing, but we realize in a free society the cost of not having the public trust what the military is doing is higher than the cost of having an independent person saying what you're doing.
I love that you put the highest ideals on anything that we ever talk about, because that is the pinnacle. That's the idea that we're trying to achieve. In reality, it's overlapping incentives. We understand that, like, a lot of times military leaders have to swallow the fact.
You're not going to give us the money we want to pay for the things we want to pay for unless it looks like we're being open with you.
Right. And so, and they don't accept the PR releases anymore. So fine, we have to allow in these third parties. Now, on the other side, these third parties, specifically Evan Wright, who wrote for Rolling Stone at the time, I can't imagine the amount of ridiculous extra pay that he was getting to put himself in danger from his job, one. And two, the story that he came out with, Ben, we had to download this book. He's still getting royalties. Every time we say his name on the podcast, his bank account probably increases by a handful of cents. So there's incentive for him to go do this.
But you could tell there were times he questioned if the incentives were enough.
Well, what he should have been questioning was his decisions, because he even said, like, the book opens with him explaining this whole setup, where he was him and another reporter that volunteered to go with the Marines specifically. But in order to go with a combat unit versus a headquarters unit, you had to go through specific chemical weapons training. And the standard chemical weapons training that we both went through multiple times and had to sit through.
Right.
And And they do this. The instructors always do this on purpose, is they're giving you the worst case scenarios. Now, you have to hold your breath, close your eyes, and put your mask on. You have 9 seconds. If you don't get it on in 9 seconds with a good seal, you're probably going to die. And if you feel your skin itching, don't itch because the skin might come with it. Also, if you feel like giddy or happy, that's the nerve agent. You need to auto-inject yourself within 15 seconds or you'll be paralyzed. And like all of these like nightmare stories that the guy is saying had one of the other reporters really completely back out. Like, I am not doing this. This sounds terrible. But Evan Wright stuck it out and decided that he was going to keep going. And then he showed up at the actual unit, and he was supposed to go with the commanders in the back and realized this is something he doesn't talk about a whole lot. He mentions it a couple of times where he was bribing people with tobacco because he had done this kind of thing before.
I love this story. Hang on, I'm going to contextualize it just a little bit. I'll let you finish telling it. So at the time, the intelligence reports about what the capabilities the Iraqis had were still significant enough that they believed that the potential for chemical weapons being used against them was very, very high.
Yes.
So the posture at which they wore what's called a mission-oriented protective posture suit, or MOP suit, was over. They were erring on the side of wearing it too much. So you can imagine being in the Middle East where the daytime temperatures reach like 110 degrees, where you're wearing these thick over jacket, over pants, over boots, gloves, a gas mask, and a hood was too much. And they were wearing this like all the time. They must have stunk so bad. Oh my gosh, those guys must have stunk so bad. So
you go nose blind to yourself after about 4 days. I promise you, because I know from experience.
So anytime they start taking rockets or mortars, there's the potential that some of them are chemical weapons, and the Marines just have this knee-jerk reaction of they're always wearing this suit, and they're making them put on the gas mask. And Evan is scared to death that he's going to get hit with all these horrible things they told him in his training, and so he's putting it on too fast. So at one point, he's chewing tobacco because that's a habit he's picked up from the Marines. Go ahead and tell the rest of the story.
All right, you picked up on the wrong story. That's not the story I was telling. But
okay.
No, it's fine. Yeah, there's one point where they're taking incoming fire, and they all thought it was chemical weapons, and so everybody put their masks on. And in his haste to put his mask on and do everything that he was supposed to do right, which he did, and got all sealed up correctly, he had this huge wad of chewing tobacco in his mouth, and and he had his mask on, and like he can't spit it out because there's no way to get that out of the mask. Like they even said in the chemical weapons training, one of the things that can happen if you're exposed to certain chemical agents is you will vomit, and if you vomit into your mask, if it's too chunky, you won't be able to clear it out through like the drainage, the automatic drainage that's in there or whatever. So you'll have to like eat it back down or chew it down, or you will suffocate. And so like he was remembering that discussion when he's like, should I just spit out this giant chunk of chewing tobacco and all this spit? And like, no, I might drown in my own chewing tobacco and spit. So he decided to swallow it. And then he just talks about how awful that was for the next like half an hour of his life. But no, the story I was telling, he didn't mention it very well in the book, but in the series on HBO, they show him one of the methods that he used to walk around and get the actual story, because he's always talking about how he went up to this person that he never talked to before. He went up to this person and never talked to before and got all this information out of them. One, he's probably just a very personable guy. But two, one of his rucksacks was full of nothing but various forms of tobacco, and he bribed blatantly every person that he talked to. This is how he got to be embedded with
This is reading between the lines of the people who produced the miniseries.
Yeah. This is, for the miniseries, they also brought on the second lieutenant, or the Lieutenant Fick. They brought him on as a consultant for the series. And so we got a lot more of the view of Evan Wright specifically, because Evan Wright didn't talk about himself a lot. But so this is the way that like he was supposed to be back with like the commanders in like the support Humvees of this brigade that's driving up. But he bribed his way into one of the combat trucks with all the tobacco. And so like, hey, can I just ride with you guys? You have an open seat. And they, like, after being bribed and hanging out with this guy who seems cool enough, they all kind of shrug, like, yeah, sure, whatever. And that's how he ended up in Coleman's truck. Colbert's truck.
So at the time, Mattis, who would go on to later become the Secretary of Defense of United States, he was the Major General in charge of the 1st Marine Division, and he has always been characterized by his just very pragmatic approach to things, just understanding the reality of the situation and dealing with the limitations that he has. Now, if you are a commander and you're making the decision about where to put an embedded reporter in order to meet the demands that you're trying to meet of a free society and openness to the public, you would think, knowing what I know about the military, they'd also be like, all right, I want you, Major or Lieutenant Colonel so-and-so, to go get a platoon and pack it with all of the best behaved Marines that we have, and then put the reporter in that platoon. But they didn't. They just put him in some random platoon, and Marines acted the way that Marines acted, and Evan Wright wrote it down, and it was immortalized in this book.
And this is why, when I pitched it to you, like, this is one of the 2 films with the HBO series that I've ever seen that gets the military right. This is what it really feels like being down at the execution level of this giant military machine.
Yes. And we look at the quaint propaganda posters of World War II and think, oh, in the past they used to do propaganda. But we just have our own versions and ways of doing propaganda now. Because I know our senior leaders would love to portray this perfect, sterilized version of what the military is like to the public.
They do. They did. They talked in the book about how they had commercials for the Marine Corps where there was some knight that was this. I remember watching this commercial. This knight slaying the dragon that then turns into a Marine in his dress blues, and like there was multiple people in this book that signed up.
And then all the grunts that are out there getting shot at on the front lines are like, "This isn't what I imagined when I signed up for it." This is the
propaganda that I was subjected to.
But no one can. I think that was one of the themes of this book. There was no way any of them could have imagined what it was actually going to be like to do what they were being asked to do.
Not at all. And that, again, like, it's just taking into account the fact that not only was this like a very real low-level look of what an actual war was like, but then also keeping in mind that these aren't just like run-of-the-mill dudes. These aren't just guys off the street that barely made it out of boot camp. This was first recon.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. Okay. So amongst all of the military, the Marines have a reputation, deservedly so, and they've set up their selection process to be the hardcore version of the U.S. military already, just at the service level.
They got the nickname Devil Dogs from the Nazis in World War II. That's what the Nazis called the Marines. Like the Nazis literally had to give narcotic drugs to their frontline troops to have them be on the same level as the Marines when it came to aggressiveness.
Okay, so you've got these guys that have this deserved historic reputation of being hardcore, and now amongst those, you've also selected for your troops that are going to be the tip of the spear, first into battle, the reconnaissance, the recon division that's going first into combat.
When we don't know what to expect, when we don't know what the enemy force structure is, we don't know what their capabilities are, we need to send people in the ground to be able to infiltrate behind enemy lines, observe intelligently everything around them, and avoid confrontation. But if they get into a conflict, they need to be overwhelmingly powerful because they're going to be outnumbered every time. They need to be able to operate in every theater. They need to know how to climb mountains. They need to know how to survive in the jungle. They need to know how to survive in the Arctic, in the desert, in the ocean. They need to know how to scuba dive. They need to know how to disarm explosives. They need to know how to fire every weapon in our inventory and our enemy's inventory. That's first recon. These guys went through ludicrous amounts of training. They are the best of the service that is notorious for being hyper-aggressive killing machines. So
all of those requirements that you just gave of awesomeness also kind of select for a very specific kind of person. Dare I say toxic masculinity?
I don't think toxic is a strong enough word. I think they even said in the book, like, this is one of the last vestiges of like pure, like almost Viking culture that has ever existed.
Yeah. So do you think that's necessary? Is it desirable? Do we still need to kind of foster that and filter for it and have that somewhere that we can access that?
So and this is where he gets kind of high-minded about it, where he was talking about how part of their training and this part of the idea and the psychology that they're trying to breed into these guys is, one, they're trying to make them, this highly trained weapon of mass destruction, but at the same time maintain this kind of almost childlike idea of invincibility that everybody has to get over as they mature. And like, I don't know what it is, but it's probably just a byproduct or an emergent property of the training that they go through. Because they even said in basic training for the Marine Corps, they say kill, the word kill, like 500 times a day. And the idea is they're trying to build into these people that you are going to kill people and you will not hesitate. And that's just like the baseline. And so when you take that as your starting crop, these people that you're trying to indoctrinate with this idea of you will kill everything that comes across you, and then you select for the best, the brightest, and the most aggressive ones of those, I think a byproduct is just going to be this hyper competitiveness. You're taking all of the alpha males and putting them with all of the other alpha males, and it's just going to turn into this wolf pack nipping at each other to figure out who's top dog.
Yeah, and it isn't just that you're sterilizing inadvertently yourself. I mean, it also has these horrible side effects that they have really filthy mouths and they talk about sex a lot and they.
Ben, I have a filthy mouth. Ben, I talk about sex a lot. I think you're just not exposed to what a normal.
Why weren't you in First Recon, Josh?
Because I'm not a psycho. That's why, Ben.
So there was a quote from one of the characters in the book. I think it was the other company commander who plays a prominent role. They called him as a nickname Captain America, but they didn't do it in a flattering way.
No,
he was Captain America, like he was this idealized version of American military might, and it was used very derisively. None of the guys liked him.
No, he was an idiot. Like, and he would constantly his battle stress reaction was to panic. He had his bayonet fixed to his freaking M4 the entire time. Like he was gonna charge up the hill and go stab Hitler. Like this guy had a complete misunderstanding of what he was there to do.
So here's the quote. So Evan Wright quoted Captain America as saying, "We're like America's little pit bull. They beat it, starve it, mistreat it, and once in a while they let it out to attack somebody."
Yeah, thanks, Captain America. I mean, that's a good description of what the Marine Corps is, I guess.
Well, Evan's quote that gets quoted everywhere was, "The incompetent leading the unwilling to do the unnecessary."
That applies to like every military unit that I've been in.
Yeah.
Did that hit? All right, so hang on a second. You're still active duty. When you heard that, did you have the same reaction that I did? Did you pause the book for a second and just stare off into space like, wow, that hits way too close to home?
Kinda, but I also take exception to it. Because I don't think we're incompetent, and I do think what we do is unnecessary. But I understand why he said this.
Well, it's not a question of incompetence. It's a question of efficiency. I think it all goes back to the fact that people expect in organizations to run a certain way, and they get this idea from for-profit private industry that function a specific way where efficiency and return on investment is king. Yes. That is everything that you're thinking about all the time.
But when you're doing something like armed combat, by definition, there are people trying to stop you at every turn.
Well, it's not just that, but then think of the military as an organization that has essentially an unlimited budget, and their only criteria is effectiveness. Did you achieve the objective? And it's almost like, here is a blank check, get it done. And that's what the military turns out to be. Yes, they'll get it done. It's not going to be efficient for anything because nobody is answerable for the bottom line spending.
Yes, and I really like that you pointed that out. Evan Wright made this great point at one point where he talks about how they were in a constant state of rushing to get some more or waiting to do something.
Yeah.
And when they tell you that you're going to have to wait for 5 minutes, you were going to be waiting for 3 hours. And if they told you that you could rest for a little while, you were going to be rolling out in 5 minutes.
Yeah. You know that's the truth.
And it led to all these weird things. Like as soon as the convoy would stop, everybody would get out and take a dump because they never knew when they were going to have a chance again.
Yeah. Or they would spend half an hour digging their ranger graves, like the holes in the ground to protect them from shrapnel blasts that they were going to sleep in.
And then somebody would say, move over there.
And then they would move 300 meters to a different location and then have to start over.
Yep. It just wastes, all the time. Just constant wasting time, wasting ammunition, wasting resources, wasting because that's the way to, execute a war as fast as possible.
What's really terrifying, and I will say this, watch the miniseries because they do an excellent job of zooming out a little bit and showing the way that these orders would trickle down and just how asinine it was, because it wasn't... At no point in the chain of command was anybody worried about not necessarily the welfare, but the amount of effort that the actual troops doing this job would have to exert in order to execute what they were asking them to do. It was just, this is what we have to do, so let's just go do it.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because I saw some of this during my time at U.S. CENTCOM in Florida a couple years ago. And that is that even though we're supposed to all be cooperating, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, to achieve an objective, and we reorganized everything we do back in 1980 to make sure that we do that better than we used to in the past, there's still a little bit of inter-service rivalry, where the highest-ranking Marine in the room where all this is being planned wants the cool stuff to be done by Marines. He doesn't want the Army to do it, so he's going to rush in there first to get his guys to be the ones that get the cool objectives.
Well, and that also comes back to the idea that Marines are self-contained. Like, they have their own air power. They have their own pilots. A Marine pilot has to go through Marine basic training and then go be a pilot. A Marine helicopter pilot has to go through Marine basic training. They say that every Marine is a rifleman because they all go through that same basic training. And all their artillery is the same way. It's all self-contained because the Marines build this idea that they don't want to rely on other forces. Like, we all speak the same language when we're in the Marine Corps, and we don't have time or the patience or whatever to have to worry about somebody else getting their stuff right when I know I can rely on the Marines to do it. And so you can imagine somebody that's walking in off the street from day one in the Marine Corps, it's drilled into their head, Marines do Marine stuff and are supported by Marines. And then that lives in a part of your brain that you cannot extract. It doesn't matter how high up the chain that you go. And so, yeah, General Mattis is over here. Hey, you all need to play nice. This is a joint effort, not only within the different services, but within the different countries. So we're all going to try to achieve the same objectives. At the same time, you and I both know at past a certain rank, you're no longer in the military. You're a politician. And I need my resume to be as strong as possible. And what's going to give me the best bullets? What's going to make me stand out from all of these other above average height white guys that are in charge of the military? Here's something we can do that sounds really stupid and might get a bunch of people killed, but man, if it works, it's going to be great for me.
Okay. So all of that was happening at the high levels, but this book wasn't about the high level. This book was being zoomed down to the lowest possible level, where you're dealing with the privates and the corporals and the sergeants that are on the ground just dealing with the fallout of whatever it is the officers up the chain and the civilians at the top of the chain are deciding that they should do. And so they don't understand what's going on or why. And they're the ones having to deal with, like, my buddy got shot, or I accidentally shot a kid, or we're taking artillery fire that's probably from our own team, or where do we sleep for the night, or I don't have enough food, or my truck broke, or whatever.
The truck with the MREs broke down, and the leadership decided we didn't have enough time to get it out or to get it fixed. So they
abandoned their food.
So we blew it up and burned it up. And then we blamed it on the enemy, and now you're all on one MRE a day because the enemy didn't give us enough time to fix our broken truck.
Yeah, that was a big point of controversy in this. So one thing I didn't have going into this was I knew the broad strokes, like when the war started and how long it took and what actually happened. So there wasn't a lot of tension from, like, I knew they weren't going to get gassed with chemical weapons, but I didn't know what first recon did. I didn't know their role in the war. So I didn't know what was going to happen as far as, like, the specifics. What mission they were asked to do, whether or not they were going to die.
For our listeners who didn't read the book, the broad strokes are this. Once they said we're going to invade Iraq, it was a sprint to Baghdad. Like, everybody just tried to get to Baghdad to take out Saddam Hussein.
They expected to meet resistance, and they didn't, so they just kept going.
And First Recon's job, the role that General Mattis and the other generals came up with, was we're going to send First Recon up this, like, almost side route all by themselves that we expect to be incredibly thick with resistance as a distractionary force.
While the main force,
while the main bulk of the force just rolls up the superhighway completely unopposed into Baghdad.
So, and they didn't tell these guys, you know, at the low levels,
hey guys, guess what? We're bait. So we're going to drive through places that we expect to meet heavy enemy fire, and our job is to not die and just keep driving. Like, they didn't tell them that. They kept giving them almost like cover stories. Like, oh, well, we're going to go secure this town and do the thing. And they were there for like 5-10 minutes. Like, okay, we got new orders. Let's go do something else.
So they would try to get behind, they would try to understand what it was they'd been asked to do and then try to do it. And then it kept changing. And so there was this constant state of just confusion and uneasiness with, like, well, why'd they tell us to do that other thing? And then they're telling us to do this. That doesn't make any sense because they didn't see the big picture.
Well, and they weren't told the big picture specifically because everybody knew they wouldn't like
decoys.
The big picture. Yeah, you're decoys. Nobody wants to be told you're a decoy. Hey, we've decided you're expendable, so we're giving you no resources, and you're just going to run out there screaming, and hopefully you get shot at more than us.
Yeah, wow. I can't believe that was the story that this author was throwing for. No wonder it was like that. So now we have our characters. There's all of these enlisted guys with their own backstories and stuff. They all have nicknames for each other, and there's this constant banter and interaction. I couldn't really keep them all straight. I could a few of them.
The big names, like Lieutenant Fick and his gunnery sergeant Gunny Wynn, like those were second platoons, like the leadership that they were in charge. You constantly interacting with them. Lieutenant Fick
then their company commander.
Their company commander. I don't even know his actual name. It's just
Encino Man.
Yeah, that's just the only name I have for him.
Which again was derogatory. It just meant that he was a Neanderthal.
So it was great because they did this whole thing. Like he went to college on a football scholarship and did ROTC for the Marines and then became a Marine officer. But he's a college football player that didn't get a solid degree and like has no idea what he's doing and is normally. This is the other thing too. First Recon is usually small teams. It's usually a team leader who is like a senior enlisted guy, mid-ranking enlisted guy, and then his team that he has handpicked and trained and worked with nonstop forever. Like these guys know each other in like through and through, and those are the executing units. This is like the first time that First Recon had to like go in like in a convoy. They had to learn how to drive. Most of them didn't have their Humvee's driver's license even in Iraq. And they had to tag along or bring along their leadership structure, which is all these officers and senior enlisted guys that normally sit back home in the headquarters and just deal with like logistics and reports and all of the administrative work. All of a sudden now this guy who has never been on an operation before, or I've seen combat dozens of times. I have been in the thick of it. They talk about how they were in Afghanistan, like crawling through and like finding enemy positions and nonsense. Now I'm listening to this guy who doesn't know his head from a hole in the ground, who got here on a football scholarship, and like the contention was ever present.
Okay, I want to talk about this for a minute because you're right. There was this tension between lawful orders being given and whether or not the men were going to follow them. So they had their officers that they felt were inadequately experienced, inadequately trained, and were giving them orders based on knowledge that they had that the troops didn't have. So there was someone barking out and telling you what to do, and at any given time, you could feel the authority of the officers diminishing as they did things that proved that they didn't know what they were talking about or were poor judges of the situation.
Like one time at night, they were taking enemy fire from a village in front of them, and Encino Man was completely wrapped up with trying to call an artillery strike on what he thought could be a threat in trees that was like 100 meters away from them.
Right.
Which anything closer than 600 meters is considered danger close.
Right. So he was trying to call artillery in that basically could hit them.
And like he fixed like that's like trying to be politically correct as to a superior officer. Sir, that's a bad idea. Don't do that. That's danger close. And then Encino Man actually verbalized the words, "What's danger close?" and then had enlisted dudes screaming obscenities at him.
Right.
Like
this
you
is a basic thing you
kidding?
learn. This means you don't know what you're talking about.
And what's funny is like this guy, like I know I'm derailing your story hardcore, but like just this one instance is just a great microcosm of everything that was happening. Is this officer who had no idea what he was doing, no experience in the field, doing something that was actually going to be detrimental to the unit, that was actually going to get people killed, and his junior officers and his enlisted guys were trying to call him on it. And then later we find out that Encino Man put in a report to the command structure or whatever, and now everybody that was yelling at him about doing this really stupid thing are getting in trouble because they disrespected their superior officer.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the kind of crap that's just like, you were going to get us all killed, and I'm being punished for it.
No, I don't think that's derailing at all. I think that's exactly what I was talking about. So you have the orders that are coming down because you need the troops who have been authorized violence and given lethal weapons to carry out something that meets the parameters of the mission, which they might not even know.
Yeah.
And so there's this constant tension where the troops are doing what they're told or deciding if they're not going to. Like there was a case where they'd taken an enemy prisoner of war, and the company commander from the other company, Captain America, comes over and decides that the prisoner's a threat when they've already subdued him, and tries to stab him with his bayonet.
Not just like poke him, but like ran up and like tackled him bayonet first, trying to kill the man.
Which is a war crime.
Yes, and luckily enough, the guy had some metal like ammunition magazine in his pocket that stopped the bayonet, but like then saved his life. But yeah, like this dude legitimately tried to murder a guy for no reason.
Right. I found these to be kind of compelling to think about these situations where the enlisted guys were just trying to do the best they can with the limited information and all the influences and the pressure to do the mission and follow the orders, but also them deciding at the very lowest level if what they were doing was ethical or not.
That was...
this goes back to the Melee Massacre, you know? This is like, you don't just do what you're told because you're told.
Evan Wright does a great job of capturing this slow transformation. And it's a very slow boil, but you feel it happening. Yeah. Like, and then by the end of the book, you become consciously aware of it. At the beginning, all the Marines are pumped. Everybody's excited. Like we're going to roll in there. We're going to bust heads. And it's all the toxic masculinity you were talking about.
Right. And it's all just about this idealized version of war in their head that isn't the reality they're about to experience. And
by the end of the book, we are starting to talk about all of the psychological trauma that these guys had incurred because of failed expectations, because of inadequate support, inadequate leadership, of all of the very, very questionable things that they were asked to do and told to do and had done. And like this, like it's a very much more somber unit that existed when Evan Wright left than the gung-ho, ooh-rah guys when he showed up.
Let's talk about the rules of engagement for a minute. So there was this, when you're a commander and you're authorizing a force to go into a theater of operations, you have a violence slider on your control panel. That's the rules of engagement. And that is, you can put it all the way to the maximum, which is kill everyone and everything that moves under any circumstances, anything you perceive to be a threat. And that slider, if you put it all the way to that side, is probably the best way to preserve the lives of your troops. Like, just give them maximum authorization to do violence. But if your objectives for the country that you're invading, in this situation we're invading, are to preserve peace, innocent life, allow for the continuation of a free society afterwards, then sliding that slider all the way to the maximum violence level is a bad idea. But if you slide it to the opposite end, where you're maximally preserving the country, the people, their historical monuments, their infrastructure, anything like that, now you're putting your troops' lives at risk.
Yeah. And they were constantly butting against that in this book. And they talked about like the rule of engagement when they first went into the country was... like, it was complicated and it was long, but it boiled down to shoot anybody that shoots at you, which put them on the back foot. Like, if you can engage legitimate targets, but the only way you can identify a legitimate target is if they are actually attacking you. If they're surrendering...
they identified in hindsight places where there was, like, guys doing reconnaissance on them or moving freely through their lines because they realized all we got to do is not shoot and they won't bother us.
Yeah, because they were constantly having problems with uniformed Iraqi troops that were surrendering, so you shouldn't shoot them, and civilian clothed like fighters, even from other countries that were constantly ambushing them whenever they weren't. And they even talked about, like, last night we took all this fire, and all these guys have to do, because we don't see their faces or what they look like, they just got to stash their weapons somewhere and then wave at us as we drive by. These are probably all the same guys that were trying to kill us last night.
Right. Yeah, so that's the rule of engagement conflict. And there was a point where they had been given orders to take an airfield, which they weren't trained to do, and they weren't prepared to do, and they expected maximum resistance. And they were given an order to basically change the rules of engagement so that they could kind of overcome some of the limitations of their unit.
Yes, and so they were expecting heavy enemy resistance, and so they said from a certain point on the map until you get to the airfield, everyone is declared hostile. This is a legitimate military target. We're going to treat it as such. Go nuts. And what's really interesting, and the book talked about this, but the show did a much better job. That ROE came down the radio, and one of the other, the Alpha Company, their company commander, Captain Patterson, who very conspicuously does not have a nickname because everybody liked him and he actually knew what he was doing. Like they talk about it in the book, but in the show it's perfect because this order comes down the radio to only the company commanders. They have a separate radio frequency.
And the troops didn't hear it.
The troops didn't hear the word. And then Captain Patterson, they show him in his truck. He goes, do not pass that forward.
Do not relay that order.
We are not telling our guys that everyone here is hostile. That's insanity. And then they show Encino Man like, okay, pass the word. And then his entire company's like, all right, let's light up everybody we see. And just like that level of decision making that's happening,
and that's
all
a good
the time.
Contrast.
Yeah,
I love that you highlighted that way that went down, because I think that is the great example of one of the ideals of the way that we do war in the United States military, which is centralized command, decentralized execution. Let the commanders on the ground who are in the situation make the judgment call. And that's what happened with Captain Patterson. He's like, we are not currently experiencing enough threat to justify this level of change to the rules of engagement.
Yeah, and it turns out, like, Bravo Company, who's Encino Man, just passed down, well, that's the word, and that's what we got to do. And everybody's declared hostile, and then one of the youngest guys in the team ends up shooting a couple of kids that because they were, according to the rules of engagement, legitimate targets, but now we have like severely injured civilians that got, once they took the airfield, there was no resistance
scars
there.
And resentment of those people forever.
Oh, and then they brought them, like they took these kids that were shot by this Marine and they brought them to the Marine unit for medical assistance. Right. And they almost had to do like this whole like internal mutiny to get the command structure to medevac these two kids out of there.
Yeah, and Evan Wright spends a lot of time focusing on that little vignette, and rightfully so.
Well, it
had a big impact on the morale and the wellness of the unit.
It was they talked about it for days. Like there was a lot of people that stuck their neck out to really like they were really challenging the command structure on that. Like, we did this, we need to make this right, and the command's like, no, they were declared hostile, everything's fine. And it was this very extra military thing where everybody needed to take a step back from the situation and look at it like, listen, this is a real problem, not necessarily because we shot two civilians, but just the way that everything went down. There's a lot of resentment building, and this is going to be the catalyzing thing that brings all that resentment right at you and points it right at like what we're trying to do. So
it's hard. Yeah. It's hard to make the calculated decision to say, we're going to risk your lives, Marines, to make sure that we don't do this again. We're going to take more risk that could potentially get you killed to make sure another kid doesn't get shot.
They do, again, I'm referencing the HBO series a lot because these scenes, like, it really informed me when I was reading the book part of it. Like, just being able to see the characters that are going through all this hard crap physically carry these injured kids to the command tent and confront the lieutenant colonel face to face with, this is what you ordered us to do, now you need to fix it. Yeah, it was impactful. All right, let's talk about the men for a minute. What was your impression of the guys in this unit that Evan Wright took the time to kind of portray in all of their humanity and reality? So it's
hard to not be shocked at first. When you first start hearing it, and they're felons, and they're communists, and they're racists, and they're... I'm like shrugging at you because, like, have you not like talked to any of your troops? Like this is all right. So maybe I have a more. I deployed with the Army for 6 months when I was in Afghanistan, and like being with the Army unit like really opened my eyes to the kinds of people that end up being junior enlisted men in like an infantry-based force. Because our system selects for people that want to go do violence on behalf of their country. And not in any small portion preys upon maybe the least represented or the least prosperous portions of our society. There was multiple times where they talked about like, oh, this guy was like on probation and facing his third strike, but then like the judge and the DA made a deal that like, hey, go join the Marines and we'll like waive your sentence or whatever. Like there's or the Marine Corps recruiters. These are down on their luck guys that barely scraped in. Marine Corps recruiters got quotas like every other recruiter, and like you said, we're selecting for violence. So there's places you can find violent people. But there was even an objective person there. I specifically remember this little vignette Evan Wright gave where he said the battalion chaplain came to First Recon, and he was like, "You guys are vile. Like you're not like any of like even amongst the Marine Corps, you're really filthy." Well, this was the again, we are selecting for the most aggressive
and the most like competitive, because like to put yourself through the kind of training that they went through, you have to be a very specific sliver of the personality diagram. And it's not just competence, but it's aggression and some kind of idealism, but then also unflappable self-confidence and assuredness in your capabilities.
I think every one of those guys had to kind of have an understanding of what their motivation was. And even though they were technically doing the things they were ordered, to them they would be like, I'm only doing this because I'm protecting my friend here next to me.
Well, that's the justification that you always hear about this, right? Like you can high ideals and this is Maslow's I don't know, the hierarchy of needs kind of thing. Like you can rationalize it at a logical level of like, well, I am here for the big picture of, spreading freedom or whatever, but that doesn't satisfy the feelings. Like that's an idea. That's not an internal emotion. And that's when you attach to the guy next to you. Like I am here to help that guy, because that's a more tangible, in your face, real thing that like I'm here for them.
It kind of is, but still, if that was really your motivation, then the safest thing you could do was turn around and go the other way. Like, go back.
No, hang on a second.
They were still following the orders.
But we're still in the super hyper-masculine, dominant, alpha wolf pack. Like, everybody else is facing that way. Yeah, the smart thing would be to turn and go the other way, but I'm not going to look like a chicken in front of my other alpha wolves. No way.
Okay, so one of the characters' name was Reyes. There was an interesting vignette Evan Wright gave that I really liked, where Reyes talked about how he had been working as a repo man in Los Angeles, where he would go around and repossess people's cars, and he came to this realization that he was working for the man. Like, these were down on their luck people like him, and he was going and taking their cars away because some rich white guy told him to. And he didn't like that. He didn't want to be the man. And he kind of had this theme of that all throughout what he did. At one point, as he was reflecting on the trauma they were starting to inflict and receive, and he was like, we got to be tougher than this, than all this problems we're facing because of this experience we're having. He said, here's a quote I wrote down from him: "In my civilian world at home in Los Angeles, half the people I know are on antidepressants or anti-panic attack drugs because they can't handle the stress of a mean boss or the crowd at a 7-Eleven when buying a Slurpee."
Yeah, and honestly, like it's the insightfulness that some of these guys had was startling. And you do think about that. I think about that a lot. I think about sometimes I'll be at work and my boss is stressing about somebody, and then she'll look at me like, well, aren't you worried? I'm like, no, I am not worried. This does not come anywhere near my threshold for being stressed out.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit... I'm not trying to insult you here, but I think it's a little bit short-sighted to look at combat stress and think that it's on the high end of the spectrum and the low end is something like a line at the 7-Eleven. Because I think our bodies and our physiology is naturally conditioned to, like, when you're in an experience where somebody's shooting at you, you have a response to that. Your pupils dilate and your senses come to alert, and you get adrenaline and you fight back, and when it's over you come down from that, but we're conditioned to do that kind of thing. Well, but if you are in a situation at home where you're threatened and you can't shoot or fight back or yell or react, you're constraining all of that emotional response. It's more emotionally traumatic.
Well, what you're talking about is just natural stress reaction to stress. It is your body doesn't know the difference between psychological, logical stress of missing a deadline at work versus there is a lion that is going to eat me in the next 3 minutes. Your body doesn't know the difference.
That's exactly the point I'm making.
So your physiology responds exactly the same way to both of those things. This is why you, as a person, have to put filters on yourself to recognize that this is not an existential threat. Adrenaline, you are unnecessary. Elevated heart rate, dilated pupils, the urge to void my bowels. All of that needs to go away. None of that is necessary in this situation.
But in war, for these guys, they actually got to do all of that stuff, like fight back and just revel in the flow of adrenaline. Now, we still expect them to restrain it, though. So there's these series of tautologies that we put them in. We want the perfect Marine to be violent, but not homicidal. We want him to be a critical thinker, but follow orders. We want him to be moral, but not hampered by guilt. We want him to be empathetic, but not hampered by his beliefs. We want him to be energetic but focused. And it's this constant stress of all of these tautologies that we want these Marines to do. And sometimes it breaks in one direction or the other, and they do too much of one of the things.
Yeah, and there's a couple of episodes in the book where they point out when somebody got to their breaking point over something that was sometimes almost trivial, and then they describes how that person was like hard broke for a while until they were able to pick themselves up, put themselves back together, and re-engage. Like the incident with taking the airfield, where Trombley, one of our characters sitting in the back seat next to our reporter, shot the two kids on the way to the airfield, which they point out this in the book too. He was in a Humvee on a dirt road firing at two child-sized targets from 100 meters away out a window and hit them both exactly what he was aiming for.
Good job, Trombley.
That's scary marksmanship. Anyway, but when the kids got brought to the camp injured and they found out these are the kids that Trombley shot, and they went through all of this stuff to try to help these kids, like Colbert, who is called the Iceman in this book because there's nothing that rattles him and he's ultra professional regardless of the circumstance. He was hard broke for a few hours until he got to reset himself.
Yeah. So, and you're right about how this was a situation where their empathy was provoked. Like, they were like, no, forget all the orders and the objectives and what we're supposed to do next. We need to help these kids that we injured.
Yeah. And again, like that one specifically was harped on because it wasn't just like any one person that this was going to push the threshold for. This was like the entire second platoon almost, like taking personal responsibility for the injury of these two kids. And like they were going to have a full-on revolt. Like if leadership completely ignored, like every one of your guys is saying, you need to do this in a threatening tone. You should listen to them and not just berate them for yakking back to their superior officers.
But you can also understand, I think there was that scene from Saving Private Ryan where there were like those parents in that bombed out French house that were trying to give the platoon their child. Like, yeah, you can understand why the chain of command pushes back when you want to medevac a kid.
I mean, yeah, I get it. It all comes down to resource management and like the risks involved with calling in
and
what we now realize is
like
vulnerable medevac personnel and equipment to what was the tippiest tip of the freaking distractionary force. So it makes sense that Colonel Ferrando, call sign Godfather, because he had throat cancer, talk like this all the time. Did a great job in the show. It was fantastic listening to him talk all the time. Very threatening man. But yeah, you can understand, like, with his bigger perspective on what was happening, not wanting to, one, like, call any unnecessary attention to the operations they were doing, and two, not want to be, again, Mattis is trying to show off and, like, get brownie points. Ferrando is trying to get brownie points with Mattis. And, like, they made, like, the film does an excellent job of pointing out that there was times that he went out of his way volunteering his dudes for ultra dangerous crap to look better to his boss.
Yeah, no doubt.
And, like, he had a calculated risk.
The men were aware of this.
Yeah, if I call in medevac for these civilians, how is that going to reflect on me and my performance when I'm trying to buck for promotion? And none of these team leaders who have been in combat and actually killed people cared two poops about Ferrando's promotional requirements.
What happened to Ferrando?
I have no idea.
Did they do one of those things over the end credits of the miniseries where they give the little text blurbs of what happened to everybody?
I can't remember. I don't think that they did. I think the last scene that we saw was like when I was talking about how heavy the book got towards the end. Like the closing shot of the series is Evan Wright getting on a helicopter and flying away from the unit as like multiple, like one person's having an emotional breakdown, two people, like I think it was Patterson and Encino Man were in a fist fight. Like just bad things were happening.
That seems appropriate. There was something interesting at the very beginning of the conflict where the Marines had to grapple with the idea of what the enemy really looked like versus what they thought it was going to look like. you know, they had this idealized version of who they were going to be fighting against that was someone worthy of glorious battle. This organized resistance driven by idealism. And then when they actually started to encounter these guys, it wasn't that at all.
No, it was random.
They were ill-equipped. They were barefoot. They were sick. They were hungry. They would surrender easily.
That was part of the thing that really rattled them is seeing like one of the refugee like lines of people just walking walking through the middle of the Iraqi desert with no shoes and no water, trying to make it to the next town, because if we go back, all of our commanders are going to have us killed.
Right. So all these Marines that thought they were going to show up and have this glorious battle where they were going to defeat the worthy enemy, actually, it kind of took the fun out of it for them.
Well, because exactly what you just said. They were going to fight the enemy. But what they realize is they're fighting guys who are in the military trying to do their job, and they're going through the same hassles and headaches and dealing with the same incompetent leadership that they were. They
were just like them. They just want to live.
They were starting to humanize the enemy, which is the last thing you want your frontline combat troops to do.
I don't know. Again, that goes back to the tautologies. Like, you do want them to humanize them because you don't want them. You don't want another melee massacre, and you could see that while they wanted, they also didn't want the thing that happened in World War II where they'd give a guy and send him out to the front lines and he wouldn't shoot anyone because he didn't know what to do or was afraid to. But you also didn't want to have him be so ultra violent that they were just going to lay waste to everything around them.
Okay, well then that segues very well into this tautology of things they were doing, where one, demonstrating the overwhelming mechanical firepower that the U.S. can levy against its enemies, and two, the idiots that we asked to actually pull the trigger laying waste to entire towns for like almost no provocation whatsoever. Like, how many legitimate war crimes were described in this book? Like the first recon, they did it. They did an excellent job with this in the show too, where they were stopped somewhere and there was a little hamlet a couple hundred meters away, and so like, hey, let's do some recon training. They're all laying down, looking through their scopes and their binoculars, observing and trying to understand the dynamics of the situation that they were looking at. And as they're sitting there watching this peaceful village, a bunch of army dudes roll up in their armored convoy with the Bushmaster 25mm whatever, these giant machine guns, and just lay waste to the entire place. Civilians' houses didn't matter. There was like nothing left standing after they left. And the Marines, outside of these armored vehicles, had absolutely no way of telling the guys in the vehicle, we've been watching them for the last 3 hours. There are nothing but civilians in this town. What are you shooting at?
Yeah. It's kind of sobering. I don't.
How many times were they outside of a village or a group of structures, and they would take a couple of pot shots, and then somebody would call in artillery that would indiscriminately lay waste to everything within hundreds of meters of that location?
Okay, I want to be clear because I've just been describing a story of what happens to someone else, but I'm still a military commander in the military. I'm about to go over to the Middle East, and I know there's no shooting or fighting going on over there. But personally, my personal slider of violence versus personal risk I'm willing to take to preserve the lives of innocents is pretty high. Like, I'm definitely going to err more on the side of taking risk for myself if it means not hurting people that shouldn't be hurt.
And you're in a position and a place in your life and a position in the military where you can put your slider there and not suffer any ill consequences. If you were one of these company commanders in First Recon in this situation, if your slider was too far to preserving innocent civilian lives, you would legitimately get your own troops killed.
Yep. I was surprised more members of 2nd Platoon, Bravo Company, 1st Reconnaissance Battalion weren't killed. There was one guy got his toe shot off, and
one guy got his
another guy stepped on a landmine.
That guy stepped on a landmine because Encino Man ordered his troops to go into a known minefield at night because he's too stupid to tell his boss that, hey, that's dumb. Let's do it in the morning. There's no urgency. Let's just wait.
Yeah.
Like Captain Patterson did, because they called Captain Patterson first. Hey, we need your guys to escort some engineers into this minefield. And he goes, that can wait until tomorrow. And then they called Encino Man, and Encino was like, yes, sir, right away, sir. You two, go into the minefield right now.
There was a point right about halfway through where Evan Wright was kind of reflecting on the morality of what they were doing. And he said something I'd never considered, but I was willing to consider his opinion on it. And that was like, it was just lose-lose for the Marines. Like, if they were violent and did everything they were asked, it wasn't going to achieve the objectives that the United States was trying to achieve. And if they weren't, they'd lose too. So for the end, the guys at the point of the spear, it was a no-win game. I don't know that that's true, but that's what Evan Wright said.
Evan Wright said that, I think, because he was really absorbing the perspective that the low-level guys did. Like, he was in a truck with a team leader and some junior enlisted dudes, not with the lieutenant, not with the captain, not with anybody that has more perspective on what's happening around them. So he's working on the same information at the time that all the junior enlisted guys were. And I know, I'm looking at you, Ben. You're still active duty. I know you felt in a situation where you're getting these orders coming down from on high. You don't have the bigger perspective, and you're just like, what are we even doing here? Where you get to a point where you just feel despondent. Like, what? Like, I don't even understand. Like, I'm a cog in this machine, but I don't even know where the machine's going anymore.
This happened to me this month. I'll tell you. I'll tell you what it was.
Tell me your despondent story. Yeah.
Okay, so I think everyone knows the story in the news. I forget the name of the guy. There was an airman first class in the Guard in Massachusetts who leaked a bunch of top secret documents out on his Discord server.
Yeah, to look cool in front of his friends.
Well, these were really damaging documents that said things about, our intelligence capabilities and our relationships with our allies and things like that. They were very damaging to our national security and our relationship with our international partners. And now, all of our civilian leaders at the top of our chain of command, their vision is we need to make this right. So how do we make this right? And there's a decision made, and this is my perspective. This is my personal perspective on this. That basically we need to do things internally that show that we are flogging ourselves for the sin of not being careful enough with our information.
It's not about telling Congress that we're going to fix it. It's about Congress being able to see the pain that we are inflicting upon the services in order to ensure, like they need to visibly see the punishment rolling downhill for them to be satisfied.
Yes. And not just Congress, but our allies as well.
Yeah.
So they want it to be internally painful. They're willing to accept sacrifices in productivity, in effectiveness. They want us to waste our time as penance, like literal penance, like saying Hail Marys.
Because it's not about efficiency, Ben. It's about effectiveness. There is no when you have a blank check for a budget. Return on investment does not matter. So if you've got to spend
this airman that leaked these top secret documents out on his Discord server, it wasn't that didn't happen because I don't know how to protect top secret information. That I don't need more training on that.
Ants with sledgehammers, dude. When I was in Afghanistan, they were going through and retrofitting all of the Humvees that they had in the unit with the up armor. They're putting giant armored plating and anti whatever on all of these trucks, and everybody from the top to the bottom was complaining about it because these trucks break down more often because they're way too heavy. They are not built to carry this kind of armor on these things. They're no longer agile or fast or anything.
It's because Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld was getting all the political pressure to protect the troops.
Because somebody died because they were in an unarmored vehicle, and Congress said, why aren't all the vehicles armored? And Donald Rumsfeld was forced in a position where he threw his hands, fine, we'll armor all the vehicles. And nobody wanted it.
Right.
Same thing. The same thing is happening to you right now. Yeah. It's not about the airman that was in a trusted position and then deliberately circumvented the security protocols that are in place. It's about ensuring that everybody can see, no, it's not enough to say, yes, we're protecting it. We promise sometimes this crap is going to get through. It's a bell curve. The 1% is going to happen. You can't stop it. That's one of the 1%. The system is fine. They have to visibly show an overhaul of the system to be like, yes, now our system is perfect. There is nothing anyone could ever do to circumvent it, which is a lie, and everybody knows it if they think about it for 5 seconds, but that's not the point. The point is everybody from the top to the bottom can stand up in front of everybody else and say, well, we did everything possible.
Yeah.
It's about saving face, Ben, and you're the one suffering for it.
Did you... Okay, so you kind of started this off by talking about how this is one of maybe 2 books that actually is honest enough to give a clear picture of what it was really like. I would like to think that our senior leaders value that kind of thing, but there's something unpredictable about this, about what was created by embedding a reporter in First Recon and sending them into battle. Is he's going to say whatever he's going to say, and you don't get to control it. We like to think we can control everything in the military, but they were accepting the fact that they wouldn't be able to control what he did. Do you know what the reaction to this book was?
I actually don't. I don't know what the fallout was. Obviously, General Mattis didn't suffer that badly because he still became Secretary of Defense.
No, and this is one of the things I love about General Mattis, and I think there are a few leaders like him that recognize that there's more value in not shutting off legitimate flows of true information than there are in trying to control everything.
Is this the same General Mattis that then got in trouble for bad-mouthing the president when he was commander in Afghanistan, and Rolling Stone was there with him?
No. It's funny because that was also an embedded Rolling Stone reporter. That was General Stanley McChrystal, who was in Afghanistan, and that was an embedded Rolling Stone reporter. And that was made into a movie starring Brad Pitt called War Machine.
What's really funny about that is I remember reading that article and it's blowing up the internet like, oh, this general's bad-mouthing the president. I'm like, yeah, he was probably after hours in his office with a handful of his trusted other senior leaders drinking booze, doing the standard BS
That's exactly
sessions
what happened.
Everyone does that you have to do in order to relieve the stress
in
of your
every
underlings.
industry everywhere in the world. I don't know why we act so shocked in the public when people are actually human, because we know what humans are like.
Everybody that brought that up was like, did you see the general bad-mouthing the president? I looked at them and I said, have you never bad-mouthed your boss ever? And they go,
that's the right answer to that.
Yeah.
That's the right answer to that. Okay, so here's what I found out. So Sergeant Espera claimed he was forced to leave the battalion following the release of the book. Sergeant Coker claimed he was disciplined for statements that were attributed to him in Wright's book.
Of course.
But he worked as an advisor on the adaptation of the book. There was one of the characters in the show that actually played himself in the HBO miniseries, Sergeant Rudy Reyes.
That's cool.
Yeah. But here's the part that I like that I found out. Despite initial doubts, Marine commanders later encouraged the officers of 1st Recon to read the book and the articles to get an insight into the reality of war. Ooh. That is something I love about the Marine Corps. There was an Air Force colonel named John Boyd that maybe we'll do an in-depth dive into someday on this podcast. And he was also a truth teller, telling it like it was. And he was ostracized by the Air Force. But you know who really took to his teachings and doctrine? The Marine Corps.
The Marine Corps. Yeah. Self-reflection. Pull your head out of the sand. This is what people think about you. What can
Just
you
accept
learn from
reality
it?
For what it is.
Yeah.
And don't shun legitimate sources of insight and visibility down to the lowest level. Do you know how valuable it is to General Mattis? Do you think he picks it up and be like, how did this make it through PA? He looks at it and says, this is what it's really like. These are the things I need to know, that when I command my troops to go into battle, this is what's going to happen to them.
This is the stuff, Ben, that you forget when you go to staff. When you go up to the headquarters and start working for the man, you forget about what it's like at the low levels. I want you to think back and remember what it was like being that one LT in charge of the network operations center. And remember the pain in the butt it was when they got emails from guys like you telling them to do nonsensical things. You're talking about how the self-flagellation is just wasting everybody's time. You need to remember that and make that a core memory and think about that thought every single time you task one of your underlings to do something.
All right, I want to end on kind of a personal note, and that is that from my religious upbringing and background, there was kind of a blanket prohibition against consuming obscene media.
Interesting. Okay.
Rated R movies or songs or books where people use, coarse language or talk about things. And I have made a deliberate and what I think is a principled decision to ignore that in this context. That I think as a practitioner in the profession of arms, that I have a moral obligation to deliberately expose myself to these kinds of things for the purpose of understanding what it is I'm a part of.
Okay. I applaud you for that line of thinking, and I would encourage you to expand that to your life in general. Like being in the profession of arms, like you're using that as a justification to expose yourself to stuff like this. But did you feel like you learned something from this? Do you feel like you're a better person for having read this book as a military leader?
Yeah, I think you made the point really well a minute ago when you were talking about, General Mattis, when he becomes Secretary of Defense and he's ordering troops into battle, that his decisions are going to impact the Esperas and the Reyeses and the Cokers down at the tip of the spear who accidentally shot a kid and are going to be traumatized for the rest of their life.
Yeah. I was actually trying to take it and generalize it a bit. Like, if you, in this circumstance, exposing yourself to this material that you're otherwise not supposed to consume, if you think you are even a slightly better person for that, there's no reason you can't extrapolate that on the larger scale. There's no reason you should not consume, like, consuming any form of media, whether it's regardless of its source material or how bad it is, will give you more insight into the world that you live in. And if nothing else, in the insight of the insane maniacs that wrote it in the first place. Like, you're just going to know more than you did before you read the thing, or before you watched the thing, or before you heard the thing. Like, that's just.
But we all have to filter some things out.
Yes, but avoiding it is not the message.
Let me use this slippery slope in the opposite direction, Josh. How can you not use that as justification for why you shouldn't consume things that are more spiritual and more religious in nature?
Ben, I've read the Bible. Ben, I've gone to church services of multiple denominations. I am not burying my head in the sand when it comes to this stuff. I've just yet to come across a religious message or experience or speaker or media that was able to change the current way that I view and think about the world. At the same time, I'm not shutting it out. Like, I don't like completely shut you down every time you start talking about LDS. I let other people talk about their religious experience and things because I understand that's important to them. But having not experienced it myself or gone out and like consumed that media on my own, I wouldn't have that perspective.
Yeah. Well, thanks for inviting me to read this one. I just didn't know it existed, because I have made an effort to kind of consume the contemporary documentation, that has come out of these most recent conflicts that I'm still participating in.
Well, and there's so many books. Everybody that's a mid-level officer in the military wants to write a book about these conflicts from their perspective, and they're so sanitized and they're so they go through the normal channels. This is something that should be required reading for Air Command and Staff College, because it is so eye-opening into this is the crap that your troops are going to experience.
Right. Instead of looking at like, how do we let this get out? It's more like, we need to understand that this is what it's really like.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you liked it. I hadn't read the book before this, so I'm glad that you forced me to read something that I'd only watched on TV. Obviously, they say the books are always better. In this case, honestly, like, I'd encourage you to watch the series because it's really good. That was my first experience.
I'll check it out. And I think I talked about this before, but I agree that giving an entire team of people the chore of trying to understand the logistics of all of this, figure out where people were at what times, and then depict that on film helps it get more organized in a way that you can understand better what was happening. Where was Evan Wright? Who did he talk to? When did he talk to them? Where was the Alpha Company? Where was Bravo Company? Like, yeah.
Well, and you can read this and you can feel like, man, this is really BS. But when you're watching it happen in real time with the people interacting with each other, like, I like this character. I know this character's an idiot. Why is he doing these things? Like, it really gets you emotionally invested into these bad decisions.
Yeah, I'll check it out. All right, Josh, this was the episode 99 of the Bad at Magic podcast, which means we have been doing this for almost 4 years now. We're about to come up on our, an even number multiple of 10 with 2 zeros behind it. So, listeners, if you have any questions for us that you'd like us to talk about in episode 100, you can go on our subreddit or the Facebook and drop your questions there, and we'll talk about them next time on episode 100.
I don't know what's more amazing, the fact that we've been doing this for 4 years and you still listen to me talk, or the fact that other people listen to the two of us talk. Like, that's insanity. If you have questions,
talk about that insanity next time.
Yeah, it'll be all about the insanity. Come join us from the insanity. Ben will be on the other side of the planet. Oh, this is going to be a logistics nightmare, my friend. Well, if you like what we do, consider sharing us with a friend. If you like us, maybe your friends will like us too. If you really want to show us some love, consider taking your phone out of your pocket and giving us a good review on the podcast player of your choice. It's crazy the visibility we can get from a couple of good reviews, so please do that if you haven't. If you really love everything that we do, and you want access to some unique /stupid /extra bonus content, consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page.
And until next time, try to be a little less bad at magic.